Yo, what is going on, my fellow weebs? Chrono here, and welcome back to the channel. So this is a video you guys have been asking for a long time. It's been too long since I've done one of these, and honestly, we need to get kind of back in the swing of things. But we have an updated, essentially 2.0 class interview for you today. We'll be talking to our good friend Mitch, who will be talking with us about Force. Force recently got quite a glow up with the recent expansion. Forces everywhere doing some pretty crazy damage. And we're going to sit down and ask all the questions about what's changed with Force, how strong is it actually, and what can you do if you want to look into being a Force yourself. Before we jump to that, if you're new here, I'm Chrono. I promote cover PSO2 content. Right now, this is part of a series, the class interview series. We have done a previous interview with Mitch beforehand. So if you want to see what Force was like before the changes, maybe you're coming in a little bit later, you weren't aware of how bad it was previously, go check out that interview where he talked about all those things. And then pop back over to this one. This one's gonna be more about what's changed and kind of like what we like to see and what we want to see more of. I get a bit of an idea of kind of where Force fits. I'm scared to say in the meta specifically, but where Force kind of fits in the rankings amongst classes and kind of go from there. But without stalling for any much longer, let's go ahead and hop over and get started with talking with Mitch. All right, Mitch, so if you want to go ahead and introduce yourself, let the people know who you are and why they should be paying attention, I guess is how we can do
Sure.
this.
I am Schmeetch, or Meech is fine. I am your resident Force guy and probably the record holder for the longest HR complaint in all of NGS Force history.
Okay, you said Force history. I was going to say, I don't know about that. I'm pretty sure the bouncer guy hated me before they changed stuff, but feel free.
For Force specifically, I think I have the longest HR complaint ever delivered over time to SEGA. But yeah, I wrote the Force guide. I do a lot of cool time attacky Force stuff, and I like to think that I know what I'm doing when it comes to this class.
He's shown he knows what he's doing a lot. So if you don't follow him on Twitter and see some of the posts that go up there, it's you would agree and you would know why he's here talking about Force over pretty much anyone else that I would know. But yeah, so we're just going to kind of jump into this. We've done one of these beforehand, and Meech was awesome to give us his time today because I have been super all over the place with everything that's been going on IRL. But we're going to kind of just jump right into this. So, I mean, let's go ahead and just rip the Band-Aid off, I guess. Start it out. Force change is good. Force change is bad. Force change is okay-ish. How do we feel about it?
2 enthusiastic thumbs up, 5 stars. The Yelp reviews are banging. It is incredible.
Awesome.
How much they have changed the class like overnight. And given what they changed, you think it wouldn't like have translated that way given like all of what we asked for in theory to like make the class like quote unquote good. But you know what? It all ended up pretty okay. It's not like blatantly OP. It's pretty strong now.
It's
like
I'm finding a tough time like keeping up with Forces these days. So yeah, they're pretty beefy, I'll say the least.
Yeah. Oh yeah, no, we definitely got some much needed like base damage tweaks that we were asking for, particularly to compounds. I think that was like one of the bigger ones as far as like raw damage changes go. And there was like a few like very like minor adjustments up and down like the tech board for like particularly weak elements or techs that like weren't holding up to the likes of like fire or like lightning. Like I know wind got got the biggest adjustment of the lot if memory serves. I don't remember off the top of my head now. It's been a couple months. But now all the elements are more or less like equal. They're more equal than they were in their respective weaknesses than they were prior. So Force is more consistent when being played properly in that regard. And just they've added so much quality of life that has made such a profound difference in both how the class plays, how comfortable it is to like maneuver, and most of all, the changes to rod impact I think are really very core to what has made the Force update so good. I mean, there's a lot that like, you know, when it all comes together, it made it really, really strong. But I think at the very center of it all is what they did to rod impact. I think that's very much so the biggest player here, because it not only enables a lot of damage, but enables a lot of like very cool like interplay that you wouldn't necessarily expect with like, especially with like other weapons.
Gotcha. Well, that's kind of a good transitional point. I was going to say, like, what do you think the most impactful thing was that really kind of shifted things for Force? You kind of did list them off already for the most part. And I'm curious about a couple that 'cause I know there's some that kind of transcends just force, others that are, it seems like it's more specific to them. The one I want to focus on right now is rod impact. It seems like people are starting to do much more interesting things because of the changes of rod impact. And I mean, to be fair, I don't personally play force. I can't tell you I know what changed specifically with rod impact, but what is like the big feeling thing with rod impact that's kind of made things feel so different?
So the short answer is that now rod impact guards. It has guard frames when you time it right. And to discuss why that's such a big deal, we kind of have to rewind a little bit to the concept of Gifoye parry, which is like our OG, like strongest quote unquote counter in like pretty much most or all situations, which is where you time your Gifoye in accordance with the enemy attack, specifically uncharged, and it guards the enemy attack. But when you guard as a force, it throws out elemental bullets. So tech parries, since we got Grant Slater, it kind of became tech parries as kind of an umbrella term.
Hmm.
Tech parries are when you can guard, like basically Hunter Avenger style, by throwing out a technique when an attack is coming in, and elemental bullets fire out as a consequence. So that made Gifoye parry really, really strong. But we only had Grants and Gifoye for tech parries. So, if, dark, ice, lightning, wind, it's, your SOL, right? Those just kind of are what they are, but that's not the
Right.
case anymore. Now, Rotted Impact is not only both ridiculously strong, because they buff the damage of it as well. I think it's like something like 401 like raw DPS if you just like hold normal attack and just spam it. It's like which is not optimal, by the way, but there are
That's
situations where like that's what you do.
that's still a lot.
Yeah, it's a lot. But now with like elemental bullets, it's like somewhere it's like I don't have the exact number, but it's like somewhere in the 700s, like mid
That's
high 700s. It's like
that's
a very
insane.
strong parry. Yeah.
That is really, really strong. For context, I mean, numbers that you're going to start to see depending upon individual classes. I know from Bouncer, our lows are around like, for most things, in the low 300s to the high 420s in most cases. So if you're looking at, I mean, granted, we're not talking our counters and things of that, so I don't remember how much it is off the top of my head. Our block counter is insanely strong. But when you're thinking about it in context of like how much damage something is doing, 700 is pretty wild. So
Yeah. So, and again, I don't have the exact number in front of me. I should get the exact number in front of me, but
maybe we'll find the exact
okay,
number
hang
later.
on.
We'll see.
Say less. I do have the exact number in front of me now. 728.
That's
Disgusting to
wild.
say the least. For reference, our photon blast is 800. So do with that information what you will.
Yeah,
So
that's
that
really
should give you an
high.
idea. So we're within like a stone's throw of like just photon blast kind of damage in like small bursts, but for every single element now, which is great. That's done a lot for our damage. And the other like smaller thing, but just as big, that's kind of adjacent to that,
Hmm.
is now Force can hold 2 photon bullets instead of 1. So it's like a stock. There's no visual component of it in your UI, but you can
Hmm.
hold up to 2. And the way it works is that, because the game doesn't really show or explain it well,
Hmm.
but how it works is that, let's say you just use weapon action to guard an attack. Okay, cool. You have 1 out of 2 bullets stocked. So your next impact or technique will have bullets. Oh, yeah, right. That's another big thing they did to impact. Impact allows for use of bullets now, which is also what makes the guard a big deal. So
That's
if you have
huge.
Yeah, so if you just use weapon action and stock a bullet, or you elemental bullet extend, so you pace yourself
Right.
between techs to kind of quickly just snap a bullet into your inventory, you
Hmm.
can consume it with a rod impact, which is great because that's effectively still 728 just without the guard.
Right.
So I was going somewhere with that. I totally got lost in my own sauce.
I
But
was I was like, because I was thinking when you mentioned the impact situation, I was like, oh, it might be a little easy to overstack bullets, but if you're firing them with impact as well,
right.
you're also stocking and firing. That is wild. That
Yeah.
makes a
Thank you.
lot of sense.
That's where I was. Okay,
Okay.
so let's say you guard something with weapon action. You have 1 bullet. Okay,
Mhm.
so if you use a tech parry or a rod impact parry, you will quickly generate 1 and then consume 1 bullet. So you go from 1 to 2 to 1 like really quick, like in the blink of an eye.
Mhm.
So you'll still have those extra bullets to drop after the fact. Now let's say you already have 1 bullet, like stocked and ready, used Elemental Bullet Extend, and you had to use weapon action to guard for some reason. I don't know what that reason would be. That's what you did, whatever. Okay, now you have 2 out of 2. So if you use a tech parry or rod impact parry, you won't generate the extra 1. It'll basically, when it goes to generate the extra 1 really quick, like you're already full, so it doesn't generate 1, and then it just consumes it, so you drop from 2 to 1. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So like as long as you're 1 out of 2 stacks, any tech parry or rod impact parry, like as long as you got that headroom of 1 out of 2 there, you'll quickly just generate 1, consume 1, if
That's
that makes sense. But if you're full, you won't generate 1, but you'll consume 1. It's really tricky.
gotcha.
The game doesn't really like make that obvious to you. And I've seen actually just a little bit of confusion by some people by that, who are like, but like, how does it work?
Yeah, that's pretty crazy though.
That's how it works. Yeah. So that's another big thing that sort of makes Force feel much better to play now. And then another small thing, just on the topic of Elemental Bullet Extend, they
Mhm.
made it so you're not waiting a whole like business minute between tech casts to like actually lock in that free bullet. They
Okay.
cut it by like 2/3 or something like that. So you still got to wait like a little bit, but instead of like, all right, tech out, and then you wait like almost a full second, and then it goes ding, you're ready. Like you're sitting there like, I could have just used another tech. Like what's the point of this?
Yeah.
Now it's like throw, ding, okay, got it. Like you barely have to wait between now. It's much more intuitive to
Nice.
use. So yeah, just lots of little things that like we needed, that, like quality of life, raw damage, mechanics, whatever have you. I think the
Nice.
last big thing too, which is to photon flare,
Mhm.
that this is huge. So photon flare, in case anyone needs the explanation, it's our like damage button. You push it, you get 20% extra damage on techniques, 10% on charge techniques. Yeah, it's our big damage button. You can make it last anywhere from 15 to 30 seconds depending on your skill tree. And the skill they added made it so that when you use a compound or photon blast, you get 4 extra seconds to that skill.
I forgot about
And
that.
that could stock outside of combat. It could, or not outside of combat, like outside of like your photon flare active. It can activate while photon flare is active. So you could literally, like, you throw up photon flare, you're 0.002 seconds from photon flare expiring, you hit compound, boom, there's another 4 seconds. Basically, it's as if the game is refunding you your casting time for the compounds or photon blasts up to 3 times for every photon flare use. So basically, it's like 12 free seconds, because you should be using your compounds and photon blasts during photon flare anyway. It's like the optimal thing to do for
Mhm.
damage. So that's a pretty big deal, because all of a sudden you have a 27-second 20% damage buff to all your whole kit
That's
that
so
on a
wild.
90-second cooldown. So that's a really high uptime
Yeah, it's
for
pretty
something
massive.
like that. Yeah, it's really high uptime. Oh, and this actually ties into a complaint. I know I voiced it on Twitter. I don't
Mhm.
know if I don't remember if I voiced it in the last interview or not. But photon conversion, which is like the skill, you activate it, it eats a chunk of your health, and you get super regen. Wasn't very useful. It's kind of putting a hat on a hat. You know, by the time it was up, you didn't really need it,
Mhm.
because your other regen options were online. Big complaint we had was it's not really useful. Don't really have a use for that. Well, they also made it so, and this is the reason why they cut 10% charge damage off of photon flare,
Mhm.
is they made it so photon flare conversion and photon flare, or sorry, PPC, I'm just going to call it PPC to be simple.
That's fine.
PPC and photon flare now both give you short charge. That's the last like super huge change. So PPC won't give you the damage buff like photon flare does, but it
Mhm.
will give you 30 seconds of like that reduced charge time, which is massive.
That's
That
huge.
enables
Yeah.
a lot of like highly that gives you much more uptime on like damage windows where you need to like have like rapid casting to
Mhm.
do the most damage that you can, because normally that was just limited to photon flare, so you didn't reasonably have it at every opportunity. And even if you did, you were more often than not, like depending on the fight, saving photon flare for like your big stuff anyway, like your
Mhm.
compounds and your photon blasts, kind of, you know, depending on the fight, if that was optimal or not. But more often than not, it might have been.
Mhm.
But now, you know, you have a alternative access to your short charge that's really, really, I mean, it's on a long cooldown, but it's also pretty long duration. 30 seconds is pretty long.
Yeah, it's pretty
So
wild. You can have multiple stacks of it, can't you?
yeah, and you can stack it up to 2 times.
Yeah,
So
like,
while you're holding one stack, you know, your cooldown to your next stack is still going. So yeah, that feels pretty good.
that is
So we're
insane
just
how much that works, dude. That's crazy.
yeah.
I never even considered all of those things that are available. You know, the more we talk about it, the more I'm starting to understand why I'm having a hard time keeping up. Like, I don't think people realize how important, like specifically the things you mentioned about Rod Impact. Phantasy Star, at least PSO2NGS, is a very counter heavy game. So when your counters are good, like they're really good, and you have an aggressive target, it's pretty crazy, especially if you can use them very well. So yeah, dude, 700. Oh God, yeah, never mind.
728. Yeah, so
728.
kind of disgusting.
That
It's
is
kind of super disgusting.
That is a gross amount of damage, almost unethical. But I'll let you continue. You guys had to deal with no damage for a very long time, so I'll allow it.
Yeah, no, like anyone who, like me, who's stuck with Force, like through thick and thin, through the dark times, came into this update like the classic Naruto, like the Rock Lee weights. He drops them, and everyone's like, "This puny little weights. What are those gonna do?" And they hit the ground, and it's like an earth-shattering explosion, and they're like, "What do you mean? What do you mean? What did he have on his legs?" Like, you know, like they just don't know.
What kind of weights were those? Like what?
And then he just blinks to the like, and then he just blinks to Gaara and like snaps his neck in half. Like, just like that's kind of how it felt. Like once we like took a day or two to realize like what we had, and it was like, oh, this is nice. This is very nice.
Yeah.
And there's some other, there's lots of other quality of life stuff that I didn't mention that we could touch on later. But well and truly, like they made a great and outstanding effort to address many of the complaints that I saw and personally had with Force, even if they didn't address them in the way that I might have like thrown out there, like, this is the problem I see. Here's an idea of how to fix it. I don't know. I don't have your back end data. I can't see the numbers you see or why you make the, or like, you know, what informs the decisions you make. But goddamn, if this isn't a problem, please fix it, even if it's not in the way I specified. And you know what? They sure did.
Yeah, and that's the whole point of those. Like, I always tell people the biggest thing about feedback when you're giving feedback is like, it's great for you to think like, okay, this is how you should fix it. I know this is how you fix it or whatever. It's like, it's more about the feeling. You decide when it's shit. You're like, your response is, this is bad, please make not bad, which seems like really useless information when you really think about it. But like after sitting down and talking to devs, like what the real important thing is to understand the feeling behind why someone hates something. Like, and that usually helps with figuring out what needs to change about that item itself. And what needs to change about the, whatever it happens to be. It's like, hey, this feels like I hate this. And it's like, oh, well, why do you hate this thing? It's like, oh, well, it feels too slow, or it feels too clunky, or it feels like this, or it feels like that. It's like, oh, if you just make it faster, it'll fix it. It's like, it might not be the problem. You could be dealing with hit stop. We could be dealing with, you know, the amount of damage. It could just not be rewarding enough, or whatever it happens to be. Like, there's always another layer or something like that, you know?
Yeah, or it could be like, are they fighting an enemy that exacerbates the issue, and that issue really kind of isn't a thing, or maybe it's an edge case in like most other combat scenarios, you know? There's so many like angles that they have to consider. And you know, I have a lot of dev friends who have been in like the game development space for a long time, and something that they have imparted onto me that like once they told me this, like I could not ever not see it, no matter what game I go to, no matter what community it is. It's that players, if there's one thing players are good at, it's identifying a problem. They are amazing at identifying problems.
Absolutely.
Now, when it comes to like how do you solve those problems, maybe not. maybe you don't take their particular advice on that one. But if you look at like, hey, this is an issue, like outstandingly, they're great at you know, saying like, hey, this doesn't feel good, I think this is an issue. And you know, I feel like more often than not the player is right in that sense. But like, man, there's some, this isn't specific to Phantasy Star, this is just like in general, like just across various games, I'll see somebody like, this is a big problem, I'll be like, true, facts, yeah, I agree, I also think that's a problem. And they're like, and this is how you fix it, and if you don't, I hate you. And then I'm just like, that is not in 100 years how I would ever solve that problem.
It's like, that may not be the best call, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah, like League of Legends. I mean, if you've seen how people react to like League of Legends patch notes or like people's takes on champions, like you know what I'm talking
Oh
about,
yeah.
probably to some extent. Like
Oh yeah, for sure,
they're
dude.
good at identifying problems, but like God help you if you like take a look into their mind of like how they think that problem should be
How
addressed.
to
And
solve it.
sometimes they're right. I'm not saying they're always wrong. Sometimes they're right, but like by and large, like
It's usually a
yeah,
rarity of exactly how to fix an issue that players understand to an extent that won't cause any other problems. Like I've had people tell me all the time, they're like, yeah, I would just do this. And I'm like, as someone who's specialized, well, I mean, my major was network security. As someone who specialized in breaking things, because that's how you solve, or in most cases, that's how you figure out how to protect against a lot of stuff. It's very similar. It happens in coding and all kinds of stuff. But like, just in general, like in a general sense, like the first thing I think about when someone shows me like this is how I would fix is my like, how would I make this bad? Like, how would I mess this up? Like, what could I do that makes this not work the same way? Like, that's just how my brain works when I think about something. And I'm like, I could break that 30 ways to Sunday. That's a terrible idea. Like if they were to
yeah,
do this, this would not work and it would be almost worse than where it started. But yeah, like I've said multiple times, like, hey, you know, the best thing you can do is identify a problem. I was like, I don't care how much testing happens. I don't care who they give it to. I don't care how many betas, how many alphas exist. When it releases, when we get our hands on it, when the general public has it, that is when you will find the problems. They are the ones that will find it no matter what. They're just people that get to this level. They're not playing. Like devs are almost never playing at that same angle. Like one of the guys I rated with was, God, what was it? He was working for Riot. I can't specify the project because he's still working on it. But he's
oh yeah,
working for Riot. And he mentioned, he was like, yeah, when it comes down to it, when we're testing on these things, he's like, most of the time, like bug reports that we'll get back or things that we'll get back, we would have never even considered looking in that one exact spot under these specific circumstances. Or it's like the devices we're on just didn't have the thing that you dealt with. We don't have enough hardware. There's no way you can test under all these different types of hardwares and things of that sort. And I'm like, yeah, that's probably never going to happen. And he's like, we don't have, you know, 100 different computer configurations to test everyone's specific machines in their specific circumstances. It's like at most we'll be able to test a couple different resolutions, a couple different scenarios, and you know a couple different configurations, right? But like we're not going to go to this specific spot, have this specific item equipped, do this specific attack under these specific circumstances and come across the same thing that you did. It's never going to happen. Like it might under testing, but like the likelihood of it happening and we catch all of them is almost zero. And I was like, yeah, when you put it that way, it's pretty fair. That's never going to really happen that way. So, but yeah, the testing is, or just identifying issues, dude, like we're great at it. We always will be. And I always tell people like, continue to offer your feedback for stuff, but like, just remember the feedback you're offering. Like,
yeah, just
remember what you're saying. Just think about it.
yeah. I'd say just a healthy thing to do is just have realistic expectations. Like, because sometimes I'll go in there and I'll leave feedback and I'll be like, hey, this isn't a problem, or this is a problem, or something I think is a problem. I have no clue what should be done about it, but it's a problem. And just please, I don't care what you do, just have it on your radar. Please do something about it. And or like sometimes I'll be like, I'll throw in like a possible way to fix it.
Or like this is what I would like sort of thing, you know, like that's never a
Yeah,
bad thing.
yeah, exactly. It's just like just spitballing basically, as long as it seems reasonable. The important thing is like between like my topic and like why I think something is an issue or like my proposed solutions to it. If they could get the essence of like, okay, this player and anyone who like upvoted his posts, okay, clearly they think he's saying this, but like what I'm translating out of this is that like this particular thing is a problem. And it's like, as long as they get to that like core in the
Yeah.
translation, I'm just like, okay, cool.
As long as we
Message delivered.
yeah.
Mission done. That's all I care about. Like, I don't care if like they're like, oh, we got to do this word for word what he says, but we can't do that. Oh, we'll just ignore it. It's just like as long as they like can like digest like what the issue that I'm getting at when I leave feedback, I'm just like, okay, thumbs up, mission complete. Thank you so much for reading.
Exactly. It's a bit of a tangent, but you know, it's still a good one to have in those situations because like you mentioned, a lot of the things that you would have thought they would have changed for Forest weren't the things they actually changed, but it still ended up being amazing. Funny, a lot of the things that I was like, this is exactly how they should change for Bouncer, a lot of them one for one came true. But I felt like a lot of them could only come true. Like a lot of these things, I was like, this just only makes sense for this class. So like, why wouldn't you do these things? But we had a lot of things that we talked about that they could do and they could change for force. But I feel like we got the same result just through a different path.
Yes,
Which is
exactly.
funny. Like the same thing happened, just a different way.
Like, funny enough, because I remember when we did the last interview,
Mm-hmm.
they're like, "Oh, what is your wish list for Force?" And I kind of went on this tangent of like, "Oh, if I want this like second tier to all the elements, because I want something that Force can do with elements that other people can't."
Exactly.
And I went through down this list of like, I want lightning to stack faster. I want like, when you use ice, some stacks get refunded for your blot, yada yada yada.
Mm-hmm.
And they actually like did some of those things that I said or that I asked, whether they were actually looking at me personally directly and what I was saying when they were coming up with that, or if they also independently were like, hey, it'd be a good idea. Like that doesn't matter, but it's like it ended up happening. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm actually very happy about that. Um, Speaking of, kind of circling back to earlier when you're like, what has made Force feel so good with the changes?
Mm-hmm.
One really big thing, I can't believe I forgot this. It just feels so natural now, but I forgot it's a very big deal. Like on the topic of like things Force can do with the elements or that other classes can't.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't necessarily give us that, which was a little disappointing to me. Not much because I was like overwhelmingly happy with like everything else that just like I didn't care that they didn't do that.
Right.
But they did sort of give Rod that like thing that lets it do stuff with like text that other weapons couldn't hope to do. And that is both damage and elemental down factor. We got a free skill. If you use any technique with a rod, it gets like extra damage and extra down factor for just the tech having come from a rod. And that's also made a huge like deal to our overall damage. Cause I know one of my complaints was like, oh, they need to rework tech domination, pull some of the down damage and like replace it with like normal damage. And
Mm-hmm.
they came in and said, we're actually going to let you keep all your down damage and we're going to give you that extra damage that you asked for anyway. And you can have a bouncer sub level of extra down factor for it while we're at it. Oh, and it's not going to cost any skill points. It's just there. Oh,
Yep.
and you don't need force main to use it. Have fun. Enjoy Rod. And you know what? I think that is beautiful.
The
What a
force made
great
things a
thing that
little
they've
weird,
done.
but I think like I wouldn't know why you. We can get it. We can get to that. I'm not sure why it would, or how that would work out itself. But yeah, no. It's like yeah. What if we give you that plus we also give you the thing that you thought we might take away? Like, what if you could have both? And it's like, yeah, we'd love that. It's like, okay, let's do that. It's like, wait, what?
Yeah. And then you compound that with like the short charge and all the tech arts. It's just like
That's
they
massive.
at all the things that they did to change force like synergized very cleanly with what was already there, and it pulled together very like in a like exponential compounding way that resulted in like this. It just feels so good now. It just feels really good, especially light. I gotta hand it to them. Light was one of the biggest offenders of the stinkiest feeling element, in my opinion, and they tightened it up, and now I think it's actually one of my favorites.
That's crazy. I mean, I know I'm personally like a little bit jealous of the fact that Forces got like probably the one thing I did kind of want for Bouncer, which for my melee meathead friends out there, cast speed, more importantly, charge time being shorter is insane. That is basically equivalent to us getting like attack speed, essentially, right? It is less time spent not doing a thing, more time spent active. So the fact that you pretty much have access to charge time or reduced charge time a lot, from what I can tell, is pretty crazy. But I mean, effectively without counting any cooldowns, what's effectively almost a minute and 15 seconds without affecting anything else, because you have two stacks of PPC plus your other skill. I completely forgot what the name of it was.
Photon flare.
Photon flare, yeah. So you have two charges of PPC and then plus photon flare. So that's massive. That is huge. Attack speed is very important. Do think faster does help out a lot. But yeah, so wow, yeah, no, I can see why Force why I've been seeing the numbers I've been seeing on Twitter, and why I've been having the struggles I've been having recently. With other Force friends that we play with. So
So just to quickly on a final note regarding the short charge,
Uh-huh.
if you're sitting there thinking, oh, how big of a deal can short charge be? Let me put it this way. So charge foyer is like 325 DPS, like no typing, no nothing, like no tech arts, no nothing like that. It's just 325. If
Mm-hmm.
you just spam it over and over again, no foyer brand, no nothing.
Mm-hmm.
If you add short charge into that, not the photon flare, just short charge from PPC, that jumps to 384. That's about an 18% increase in damage for a skill that otherwise doesn't tangibly directly increase your damage. It just lets you do a thing faster. And that's generally a trend you can see in every tech except Gifoye, which benefits even more from that short charge. Gifoye, the Gifoye it was ridiculous before. It's even more ridiculous now, to the extent that like the new Gifoye types, type 3 with short charge, the
Mm-hmm.
DPS you could do with type 3 short charge Gifoye, like spamming it, it's sadly higher than what you could do on elemental weakness for some of the other elements.
That's
It
insane.
is that good. Like it's crazy. And that's like one of those like weird edge cases where you can like really like be outside the box and be kind of spicy, and it's fun. And like the short charge is a very big deal. It's a massive deal to our damage. We might as well have a second photon flare like in our toolkit,
Yeah,
even though it doesn't increase our damage.
it's like a photon
Like
flare light,
directly.
basically,
Yeah.
which is
It's great.
still massive. Wow, yeah, Force got a lot of stuff, man. It does add up to the destructive power I've seen recently when it comes to Force. So I am curious, in your humble opinion, how does Force stack up accordingly to like other classes, kind of at a peak level? Where do you see
So
Force at?
I think we throw down with the best of them for the most part. Because I mean, we were already like pretty okay-ish or better in like mobbing scenarios, and single target is the area we would really suffer.
Mm-hmm.
And the content would have to feature like a large amount of like down opportunities
Mm-hmm.
for us to like really like catch up with other classes. And now it's more of like we are keeping pace with all the other classes, and if the content is something that features a lot of elemental downs or down opportunities, we kind of just smoke everyone else like major big time. Like right now for Dark Falls Solus R2 like solo gameplay,
Mm-hmm.
Force has the fastest possible times for that piece of content. I was doing it myself before in early December before I went on vacation, but around that time, some of the other Japanese forces came out, and they came out with like crazy stuff like 12-minute, like 30-second, or like 12-minute, like 12-second, like
Jesus.
solo times for Dark Falls. And this is like, okay, so we could get into the tech arts a little bit later, but
Mm-hmm.
Dark Falls solo for Force is actually like so fun now because they gave Gigrants a tech art parry, which is great. So
Mm-hmm.
you could take type 3 for grants, which is like my new recommendation.
Mm-hmm.
And you take that with bouncer sub plus the new rod skill, and suddenly your effective elemental down factor is almost 400%. So basically for every 3 grants you throw at Solus, it's as if you casted 10 to his break bar. So
That's
in that
insane.
fight, suddenly you're downing him 4 times. Is it 4 times 5? It's somewhere between 4 and 6 times. I don't remember off the top of my head. It's a lot of elemental downs. Wait, 1, 2. I'm like running through the run in my
He's about to
head.
count them out
1,
for
2.
you, so you know.
Okay, it's like 5 downs. It's like
That's
there's
insane,
like
dude.
yeah, it's like 5 downs and 5 breaks. You break him 5 times, and there that opens up so many windows for us to capitalize on technique domination. And this was before we got our new EX Sogments,
Yeah, we haven't even
which
gotten to EX augments yet,
yeah,
which breaks it
we'll
even
we'll we'll,
more.
cir- we'll circle back to this little Solus tangent later when we get to EX augments, but like this is pre the new EX augments, which are quite a big deal for Force, actually.
That's pretty
So that's what
funny
I
to even
mean
think
when I
about
say
that.
like if the content features a lot of opportunities for downs or breaks, like in Goku, for example. I was really happy that they did that for like this is the Force like arcs record that you can do, because that's a
Mm-hmm.
really good test of like how do you manage your downs, how do you capitalize on your downs when they're open. And if that was an all class one, Force would pretty much smoke everyone else, just because like it's content where we both access downs and access them very, very quickly, coupled with the fact that the down gives you a weak point to attack. So it's like even double more important than anything else.
I was going to
So
mention the weak
that's what I mean.
situation.
So if there's no weak point for anyone, force, like, it could throw down with the best of them. It's probably not the strongest, but the more weak or down advantage you can pull in a single fight, the exponentially stronger we get and the more capable we are at pulling ahead of other classes.
Yeah, it really does show pretty heavily, because I was thinking to myself, like, all right, how can I keep up? Like, what is it I'm losing, or what is it I'm falling behind on when it comes to this? Like, a lot of times what we do is we'll do the current urgent quest, right? Like the current urgent quest, it's 2 bosses and they are susceptible to downs like crazy. They literally will sit on the ground if you let them in most situations. And I'm like, what am I falling behind on? But I completely forgot technique domination was even a thing. And with everything that you mentioned on top of tech domination, that makes a lot of sense as to why I'm getting smoked the way that I am, because that is a massive amount of damage. The 2 classes I've seen actually do like ludicrous amounts of damage in that new urgent quest is Force and, funny enough, Tector when you stack the bosses. So
yeah,
it's insane how much damage I've seen people put out there, and it's to the point where I'm just like, you guys talk about needing more damage in some classes. I'm like, I did say forces, in my opinion, should probably do the most damage for the most part, considering, you know, you guys didn't have a lot of down factor at the time. Now you have both. So I promised not only my chat, but also my fellow Force mains that I would specifically do this during the interview to say it directly to you, Schmeetch, but fuck you. So that was a promise that had to happen. It was very important. I did say that I was like, yeah, I'd be okay if Forces did more damage than Balancer, but also fuck you. So
hey, listen,
it is what it is.
Mom said it's my turn to play on the Xbox.
It is. Right? It's fine, but you're not getting the good controller. I'm keeping it.
All right, that's fair enough. Fair enough.
But yeah, no, it's insane how much damage. And if for context, we were talking earlier about impact, right? And you were saying it was you were looking at around 728 damage, I believe.
Yeah, 728.
Yeah. So 728 on impact, guys. For context, the only thing that I would have,
elemental bullet. Yeah, specifically with an elemental bullet. Without the elemental bullet, it's 401, which is still really good. That's still way strong. That's a good amount stronger than what it was. But the elemental bullet presence in the impact cast is what dials that up to 11.
Yeah. So to give you a context, the strongest PA that Bouncer really has access to, letting the full PA finish outright, is going to be Harrier at a little over 405. So that's just PA wise. We always talk about how strong Bouncer PAs are, so on and so forth. There's different parts of the PAs that are stronger versus others. One really good reason, one crowning achievement that we'll always have, and why I've always said, you know what, I'll take a damage loss on this if I could use it more often, is a counter edge is 2,632. So if you ever wonder why you see me spamming Raving Falcons to ensure that I always get counters, that's the reason why, because it's an insane amount of damage. But just to let you guys know that and this is, of course, this is Bouncer, but I'm talking about just in general how strong counter opportunities can be in Phantasy Star. That's why those changes are so big. Like, they're huge for classes, especially when they're done well.
Oh yeah. And if I could give your Bouncer audience PTSD here for one moment. Bouncers, remember when you got your update and Jet Sweep Jolt did like an insane amount of damage? It's like to the point where it's like, why we should just revolve our gameplay, as I understand it, like, you know, I wish for a falling ice cream truck, but
yeah, don't bully.
As I understand it, on my limited understanding, like, what you guys want to do is spam Jolt as much as you can because it's so bonkers stupid.
Yep.
Which has been a like you don't want that. Like, it's kind of like made boots less fun to play.
It's the only thing to do is to Jolt spam, and
yeah, and that's 720.
Yeah, that's weaker.
So
that's weaker.
Yeah, it's weak. It's weaker by like a hair. Basically, every time you could do an impact guard as a force, it's as if you threw out a Jolt. Like, that's how bonkers that damage is.
Yeah, it's insanely powerful. So it's just to keep things in perspective, right? Like, and again, I do comparisons with Bouncer. That's what I know, and I'm sure there's plenty of other people that have their class comparisons they can do. And I'll also make sure to include the verification data sheet in the video description, or I'll make Cry do it, and he's probably upset about me even mentioning that. But it'll be included in the video description, so feel free to scroll on down. You can pull them up, take a look at the numbers yourselves, as you're going through it, so you can get good comparisons of like what your class is doing versus other classes. But yeah, dude, Force is gaming, dude. Force is absolutely gaming.
It's never been better to be a Force main.
It's pretty freaking cool. One thing I did want to shout out in the middle of this as well, for any of you guys that might be trying to follow along, maybe you want to learn more about this sort of stuff. There's going to be, I'm not sure about on screen, again, depends on editing, but there will also be linked in the video description the Force guide that you should definitely, like, if you're not super familiar with everything about Force, even if you play Force primarily, I'd highly recommend at least at the very least pull up. That way you can take a look and reference some of the things. Control F is your friend. That you can reference and take a look at some stuff that might help out with a better understanding of the things that we're talking about, because a lot of it is like it's really cool. Like everyone around me has been a Force recently, so like it's a lot of players going to Force, and it's nice to see that, you know, at least with the last two, it's been Tector and Force, right? I believe those are the last two that we've had.
Yeah,
the last two, they seem to have hit it out of the park with these expansions. I was a little concerned when, you know, Bouncer got the renewal, but everyone else got expansions, that the expansions wouldn't, you know, they wouldn't hit as well. But I think this is the first time I've ever seen an expansion hit harder than the renewal did, honestly, for a class. So.
And I have a tinfoil hat theory about that.
Go on. I love these. Do it. Oh yes, let's go.
So my tinfoil hat theory is, I think, and this is like February of like, oh God, was it 1 or 2 years ago at this point? I forget when they first did like the Ranger Gunner update. I think there was a point where they knew class balance was an issue and that they didn't have the resources to tackle it all in one. The resources and the data, quite frankly, and probably was some combination of that. And they knew what was coming down the pipe, and they didn't know how any changes were going to like break bad in that future content in like a good or a bad way. So my tinfoil hat theory is that they knew they needed to do something, but they didn't have a clear vision of like what the class update should be. So that's why the like Ranger Gunner like combined update and the Bouncer update kind of were like mixed reception, kind of all over the place in that regard of like what hit and what miss.
In some sense, they feel a bit lacking.
I don't think they had a clear vision in their head of what they wanted these class updates to be. And then around the fighter one, I think the fighter one, they were like kind of close. Like that's when they like started to get the idea of like, okay, actually, we do know what we want these to be now. And then from Tekker onwards, I think what we're feeling is that like, I think they have a criteria, an agenda. They know what they want these updates to be. They know what they want them to do specifically. I don't think they had that sort of like, you know, and again, this is just, I don't actually know, this is just a tinfoil hat theory. I don't really think they had that North Star like guiding like what these things should be or what they wanted them to be. And I think you can really feel that in like the lacklusterness of the earlier updates versus like how great the Tekker update and the Force update have been. I don't know enough about Fighter to like lump Fighter in with that, but from what I loosely understand, it was pretty okay. It wasn't like revolutionary, but like it was helpful. Yeah, is my understanding.
That's basically what I got. Yeah, that's basically what I got from it, from most fighters. I would probably put it like, if I was gonna rank like the updates and like I'm not gonna include Bouncer because Bouncer's such a weird spot, but like it would be like at the bottom of all of them, from what I understand, is probably Gunner, and then maybe Ranger above that. I think then you'd be looking at Fighter, and then like it's then Tector Force, right? Like it's kind of like, it does kind of fit that line in a sense of like the order that we've gotten them in, and it kind of does make sense. Yeah. With Bouncer, like I like the fact they did the renewal, but like it also does show that there was a lack of like understanding of the direction to go, because a lot of the changes we got were just like very obvious. This should have been a thing already. Like, why did we go this other route with it? Like, we got, our block has a counter. Of course, a block should have a counter. Why is it just a block? Why does it do nothing? Like, it should be better. Or no, I'm sorry, our block has a refresh or whatever, like mechanic on it. And that's honestly what Kai was like. He's like, as long as I can get a refresh on my block every time I actually block something, I'd be happy. Like, that makes sense. Like, that's how that should work itself. Fanatic Blade, I like literally, it's basically carbon copy pasted out of a potential from base PSO2. It's just a Jupiter Tullus potential, which is, you just blades fly out whenever you attack. And I was like, that's the easiest thing for you to do. Like, it's not that complicated. Just make it much easier. And a lot of those things, it just makes sense for it to work that way. So I don't think it's that far-fetched to think that they just really don't have an idea of where things are going to be going, and it's going to really show depending on how well the Hunter and the Bravura expansions are going to be. Like those will be really telling, because if it continues the trend it has been, those should be pretty good, which I'm sure a lot of people are really hoping for. So we'll have to see.
Yeah. So I'm comfortable saying that from fighter to force, like there's a clear trajectory, there's a trend. I think I'm really of the assumption that they have a clear vision now of what they want these things to be, and that they really didn't before, and that what they were doing before was maybe more like reactive or like knee jerk to like a specific like interaction or mechanic, rather than, as opposed to like, Tekker and Force, for example, where there was a clear demonstrated understanding of what was an issue as felt like objectively in the gameplay, but also as reported by players through multiple like avenues. There's a clear, very like, which kudos to them, by the way, because I know a lot of people were losing faith in
For sure.
their ability to cook, but I think despite what you may feel about fighter, like the Tekker and Force updates are like objective knockouts. They're amazing. Like if your class hasn't been updated yet and it's in the pipe to get updated, Tekker and Force should have you excited.
Yeah, like I know,
Obviously
like,
temper your expectations, but like if there's one thing you can take away from Tekker and Force updates, like from the development side of things, is that there's a very clear, it's very obvious to see that they're demonstrating a clear understanding of what made the class feel bad to play, what was an issue, and they really made an earnest and, in my opinion, successful effort at resolving a lot of the issues as they were before the updates. So, hats off to Sega. They're kind of pulling it together now that I feel like, again, tinfoil hat, now that I kind of feel like they know what they want these things to be. Now that they kind of have a North Star, the content is like boom, 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 which is kind of like an echo that I know I felt back in like the original base Fantasy Star, not in terms of like gameplay, but like in the content that was being delivered. Like the quest content, the story content, because there was an era where things were like kind of mid, and then all of a sudden it felt like they knew what they wanted the game to be, and it just took off, and it was really excellent from then on. And this is kind of like, it feels similar to that to me. So, I know some people might be nervous about the game or the class updates, whatever aspect. I just give it time. I know the upcoming roadmap, I found it to be a little anemic personally, but you know what? I'm just going to let it cook. If there's nothing to do, I'm just going to play something else. It's not that big of a deal.
Yeah.
If there's one thing I do know about Phantasy Star as a series, it's like once they kind of get their snowball rolling and know what they want the game to be, it's so excellent from then on. There's no game more excellent than a Phantasy Star series game, in my opinion, once the ball gets rolling.
And it
But
takes
I'm
them
biased.
forever.
I'm a lifelong player, but
Yeah,
so I'm biased.
But like you've been there, like we've done the song and dance, like we've seen it. I've told people multiple times, like I've seen this. Like I know it looks bad now, like it always does. It looks really bad at the start because they really like they try to figure out what it is. Is a really common thing that Phantasy Star games do is they follow certain trends. Like if you look back on the previous Phantasy Star games, one thing that was like you could really tell is a product of like its time is monetization. Very, very solid. It happens the same way in every single Phantasy Star game. Whatever the popular way of selling a game was at that time, that's the way the Phantasy Star game was sold. We're talking about like things that when it's like back when Phantasy Star Online, episode 1, 2, like back when the popular thing was to sell separate episodes of things or separate discs of stuff or whatever, you had to rebuy things. That was what Phantasy Star did. They eventually got into subscriptions with PSU. That happened as well. We moved into PSO2 where it was the free-to-play model, but with a bunch of extra crap in between. They finally weeded all that stuff out. That was hilarious. And then moving now, it's more of the free-to-play stuff. But like, of course, there's like other avenues and things of that sort. Gotcha's been mixed in here and there. But like, it's a very normal thing that Phantasy Star games, when it comes to like those specific things, like they keep the same flow. Like they always do similar things, which you would hope like, oh, well, you learn from it. They kind of have to learn each time. And that's just something that we've kind of gotten used to. And that moment you were talking about, that you were like, you felt like they finally started to get it. I remember that exact time frame because it was between the lull of episode 4 and it kind of felt a little low. And then episode 5 happened, which was like a slap to the face. Was like, hey, wake up, there's problems we gotta fix. And then like right after all the class changes of episode 5, that kind of like was the great pruning of the heroes, basically. Like everyone was a hero and now everyone can go back to playing their class. Like near the end of episode 5 is when it kicked off. Like it was like, okay, they know exactly where they're going with this game now, and everything that was just banger after banger after banger release. It was like roughly the time.
I actually thought that point was like closer to episode like 3, in my opinion.
Really?
Because I actually quite enjoyed episode 4 content. Oh, okay. So episode 4 story.
That was that was a big part for a lot of people.
Boring.
Everyone was really disconnected from episode 4 because of that.
Snoozer. That was like a very clearly like, anime is popular. We're gonna make this like an anime.
Yep.
Let's go. And it's like, it's like, brother. It was so cliche. It was boring. It was whatever. But you know what? Some of my favorite urgent quests in the base game were from episode 4, like the mother like night cycle, like, and that they were so unique too, like the mother night cycle riding, and then like over the moon, and then you fight her in the big like hollow platform in space. Like that's cool. Deus Esca, where you fight like the Hydra, and then you fight him, and you like climb up the tree and fight like his maybe like banger. That is so cool. Like the coolest, in my opinion, urgent quest content was like around end of episode 3 through episode 4 and beyond. But like the most memorable ones to me was like end of episode 3 throughout episode 4. There was so much cool stuff that they were doing there. Just really like it hadn't been done in the series up to that point. The themes were unique. You know, they were just out of the box, rip the band-aid. They were completely enjoyable, even though if you had no idea what was going on, it was crazy. There was some of the coolest stuff that was happening there. And that was also around the time 13 stars were coming out. And that was like, you know, a new, like kind of fun peak in the rarity. They added new types. It was just like, for me, and yeah, exactly. So,
that's a relative feeling, talking from the guy who literally never got a Jupiter Tullus to drop. But hey, it's fine. Don't worry about it. They were sellable eventually. We got freebie variants. We could trade in for them. It's fine. No one's upset.
Yeah. But like that was also when they like dropped the new types too, so like the gear system like got less shitty, and it was just like there's a lot of little things that happened there on top of like the big content changes that, at least to me, made it really feel like, okay, I think they know what they want to do with this, and it just kept going from there. And in my opinion, it got better episode 5 and onward. I really liked episode 5 and beyond.
I always feel like urgent quests hit. That's something that they did really well after episode 3. Was big boss fight urgent quests. They almost never missed.
Yeah, just every urgent quest was like, it's the end of the world, and you're the only one who could do something about it. It's like, how many ends of the worlds are there?
It was dramatic as hell unnecessarily. We were blowing up the moon. The entire world was destroyed if things went terrible. It was awesome. Like those fights were really, really cool. I was more so concerned. It was more so referencing like story and systems and things. That's like there were a lot of really poor ones in there, and like we understand exactly what we're doing, and we're going to keep doing this thing was like episode 5 midpoint, and like right before that, so that it was honestly the class updates that really sold it for me. And that's why I tell people all the time, it's like when they really understand what they're doing with these classes, I promise you, like they're going to be good. They will be locked in. They will be really, really good. Because if anyone, and this is like just to the viewers, we'll get back from this tangent, I promise. I'm really good at tangents. But if anyone remembers what life was like before the massive changes of classes due to hero, it was a completely different game before and after 100%. Those patches. Like changes to run speed, changes to jumping, changes to the start of your combos, changes to just the ability to double jump wasn't native to classes. Something you would take for granted was like you would need a pair of jet boots for, but then they gave it to hero, and everyone's like, why can't we do that? Like, oh yeah,
your first opening attack wasn't a just attack either.
Yeah, like that wasn't a thing. First blood wasn't a thing, which hero got by default. Like it was insane how many things changed that were just like, this is now being added in for everyone to be able to do this. Like massive class balancing, massive buffs, like classes being able to cycle their buffs and do things correctly. Like it was insane the number of things that changed. And like when they get it right, they just get it and they're like, all right, we're gonna do this thing because this is what works. And they lock that in and they keep it rolling. So I know you mentioned beforehand, like, you know, For anyone whose class balance changes or class expansions are coming after Force and Tector, you don't know exactly what's going to happen. Like, you should be excited. I will lock in. You should definitely be excited. Granted, Hunter's going to be the really telling one for us to know if like the Force and the Tector ones were flukes. Like, oh, they just happened to get it right. If they get Hunter right, I'm committed. I will say, like, yes, if your class update is after, you should be excited because they finally understand what it is they need to do for a lot of these classes. If your class is
a
before,
pattern, 3 is a trend.
Exactly. If it was before it, give it some time. I know right now bouncers are starting to feel, or at least JetBoost bouncers are starting to feel better because of some of the tech arts customization changes, along with some of the weapon choices that have been releasing recently. Like, people are returning to jet boots. A lot of people actually are returning to jet boots. Even Nep swapped back onto jet boots, which I was surprised to see. I was
shocked. I was like, oh my God, he's back.
Yeah, he's got a TWAB and everything. So he's all good. Like, I was surprised to see him jumping into it. But yeah, like, those changes are starting to come. So I would keep an eye on it. Like, when you start to see those, like, the real banger, updates start to happen, look at Force and look at what they've been able to do, right? Like, this is obviously a trend. Like, Tuesday, yeah, of course, we could be lucky. We'll have to see. But I think by the time we see Hunter roll around, that it's going to be that way. But we'll reel it all the way back in after our long freaking tangent. All that to say that, yeah, these are some really awesome changes. Like, a lot of these things are really cool, and it does keep me pretty excited, honestly, for the future of what could come for those individual classes. I'm excited to see what's going to happen for them.
Oh yeah, like I kind of liked Hunter too. Like, before the Force changes, I was like, I might just do like a Hunter arc for a little bit, because I actually do like what's there. Because I do a lot of like Avenger adjacent like kind of gameplay with tech arts parries and things like that with Force up to that point.
Exactly.
And that, like, if you could do tech arts parry with Force, like, Avenger stuff is like on an execution level, it's way easier than like tech arts parrying with Force, specifically Giveaway. I have a lot of people who come in who are like, who know the concept, or who maybe have like done like Avenger type like style things before, and they just cannot for the life of them get like Giveaway parry down. And I'm just like, do not beat yourself up over that. I have had so many all class players like come in and like try that, and they're like, why is this so like needlessly more difficult to like get a grasp of than like any other like guard I have tried to execute in this whole game. I'm just like, it just takes time. You just got to get used to it.
The TLDRs, you have more time with the Hunter, like the Avenger adjacent stuff. Like, you really do have the ability to kind of tailor exactly when you let a lot of abilities go. From what I understand with Force, you just have to be, you need to
tap it.
You have to press it the right time. With Hunter, there's a lot of built-in, like, hey, you screw this up, like, you're still gonna. You just have a bit more control over it overall. So I don't really,
more safety.
I don't really blame anyone in those situations. Like, it's something you have to learn. You get used to it over time. And it's funny you mentioned that. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Which, by the way, on the topic of like Avenger stuff, really quick, there's so many people I saw write things like, I want them to add tech arts parry for all techs. And I'm just like, I'm so glad they didn't do that, because the one thing I didn't want to be was a range hunter.
Yeah, I was like, that's just range hunter. Like that.
Yeah.
that's hilarious. I mean, like, that'd be interesting, I guess. But I also feel like that eventually you'd be exacerbated. Like, you would be way too strong.
it would be overpowered. It would be kind of boring. There wouldn't really be any risk to anything ever. They would have to rework a couple of the tech arts for light. Like, it's just, there was no way they were ever going to do it, logistically speaking. But like, also, I just don't think it would have ever in any sense been healthy, which is also why I'm really glad they put it on impact, because it's like, if you manage your impact perfectly, like, it's as if you have tech arts parry for all elements on tap whenever you want it, which is awesome. But like,
awesome.
But like, you can mismanage it and run out of impacts. And it's like, oh no, what do you do then? Like, you have to, woe is you. You have to use weapon action. Like,
yeah, there's a little bit of give and take, a little bit of pull there. So it's always good to have, like,
yeah.
I've always said that it's okay to have moments of skill expression when those moments of skill expression aren't moments of irritation. People always like to, the term skill expression is used a lot of ways when any form of quality of life is brought into a lot of classes and things like of that sort. And a lot of times, like, oh, well, now we've lost some skill expression. I'm like, what you've lost is the ability to deal with an irritating mechanic that now doesn't exist, that other people also now don't have to deal with. Like, I get that you're really happy that you were able to deal with it, and part of your identity is the fact that I can do this and you can't. But like, that wasn't a form of skill expression, that was a form of irritation. So like, I like that they've done it the way that they have, at least with Force, because it does feel like it's a point of skill expression. You do have to manage your, like, there's not really an annoyance of managing outside of the fact that you don't have the ability to see them, which I feel like that's a very simple change. That's just an icon on the actual UI, something that should definitely happen. But like the outside of just the ability to see them itself, like mismanaging them, that's definitely that's a skill like that it makes, to me, that makes sense for a point of skill expression. So I'm happy that that's a thing.
Yeah. And then knowing, like, if you're not using it for like parrying, like, do you know when the right time to use it outside of that is? Like, there's like a whole like rod impact economy that you have to learn, and like knowing what to do with it at the right time and when is like so important now. I mean, it was kind of important before, but it was like there's way more restrictions that made it like a lot easier to be like, if this, then that, if, or like if A, then B, if C, then D, if E, then F, you know. But now it's like it's not nearly, it's about as clear as mud now, especially if you're new to Force.
Yeah, for sure. It's a lot more to conceptualize, which I think is good. I think it's not nothing, again, it's nothing that seems irritating or annoying. It's more about just knowledge check and understanding, and I think that's totally fine from a point of skill expression at the very least. So we did talk about damage a bit. That was fun. Let's pull over to the EX augment conversation, because that's one I enjoy quite a bit. I'm also going to show on screen really quick my combination as well as the one that Mitch is using. The one I've been using recently is turnover, evade HP, and lively, which I know some of my viewers absolutely want to talk about how useful the turnover, evade, lively meta is, and I want to explain. I basically want to wring their throats most of the time on how much I hate it. But that is besides the point. Mitch is using a different combination: shortage, HP, maintain balance, and turnover, which I think we're both in agreement on. This one would, I believe, is the strongest combination that you can currently have.
That's the strongest combination for like raw damage, yeah. And I'm just, I want to get this out of the way now. That's not the one I normally use. I am simply a buddy attacker right now, and that is simply what I need to use to get like the best time that I can on buddy attack. I do not like this combo. I don't like it one bit.
I will tell you, I prefer your combo over mine, but I'm also a turnover hater personally, at least for the way that things are set up at the moment. I know a lot of people really like turnover. I don't. I think it's high maintenance as fuck.
And some people might chime in like, well, the maintain balance, shortage, turnover combo, there's no way to like infinitely loop it without this, that, or the other. So it's like it could technically not be the best. It's like, well, yeah, true. However, in content like buddy attack, I'm catching strays left and right, so the healing is really not, or like keeping the heal uptime is like not at all a problem. Because there's like the rooms are so full of just like things just like spitting on you. That's just like it's not possible to not catch strays, or it's like at this point, like it kind of rewards you for catching strays in a sense. So like this combo, like I said, it's just for this arc's record for me. And as soon as it's over, I'm swapping back, even though this combo is so expensive. I can't, it was like 10 mil just to get this combo. It was not cheap. And I'm probably going to throw it away for something that is like a 10th that price because I like it more, which feels bad, but like it just doesn't feel good to me. I don't like the half HP thing. I know I have more effective HP or very similar effective HP after all the damage resistance is clocked in. So it's like it's a kind of the same, but I don't know. I don't like it. It just doesn't feel good to me as a Force. That's not saying it's bad with Force. I'm just saying, personally, I have other preferences for EX augments that I think are both stronger and way more fun.
If I remember correctly, mathematically, I believe it does break even. I remember for Waker specifically, it's effective in gain of EHP, which is hilarious.
Yeah. If you're a Waker, you want this. If you're a Waker, this is like your thing.
Yeah, that is like, if you are a Waker, that is your best in slot, and it's not even close. Like
by a disgusting margin. Yeah, because you also have like the dot heal, which makes it easier to maintain turnover. It's like there's so many things that make it easy to like keep 100% uptime on everything there, and you just like can't die. It's like really funny. Like this is the Waker combo for sure.
Yep. From what I understand, I believe Waker effective EHP is like 19%. I want to say for Waker sub, it's like, yeah, it's either like 5 or 2. And then for like everyone else, I think either it breaks even or it's slightly negative, like slightly. But it is a bit safer on the terms of dealing with large hits they're chunked so much lower that you don't end up getting like chipped out as quickly. Small hits though, you can still get chipped out fairly quickly, but it just depends on how things work out. I'm just used to living the shortage life as I did it before maintain was a thing. But we kind of talked about, you know, what you're using currently at the moment. And funny enough, I even thought about it when we were mentioning it beforehand, but since PPC does actually cost you a bit of HP, it's an easy way for you to proc, almost force the turnover heal to start. Depending upon your situation. So that's actually pretty nice.
Yep, and I do use that partway through my buddy attack run because there does come a point where you're not catching strays anymore. So there is a halfway point where it's like, all right, convert time, not for the turnover uptime for healing, but like also just because like I need to cast faster because I'm trying to haul ass, I'm trying to move.
Right.
So
right.
like it's just another thing that synergizes with it. So it's like it's good for force. Don't get me wrong. It's just not for me, and I would have other recommendations that feel amazing and are quite strong.
So moving away from the what we dislike and we're getting rid of, and also if Sega is ever watching these, just give us the ability to swap EX augments, please, for the love of God. Stop making us overwrite them. Like that 10 mil wouldn't feel nearly as bad if you could just swap it back onto another weapon and then swap the one you wanted.
Yeah, seriously,
it'd be so much nicer.
And also wouldn't make everything a little less expensive, but I understand why they do that.
It's to keep the chase there, but I would rather I'd rather chase the perfect substats, honestly, because that's what keeps me from chasing the perfect suffixes on those. Is because like eventually overwriting them is going to be terrible. But regardless, moving to something you do like. Now, I am a very big fan personally of shortage maintain. What was it? It's down PB or something along those lines. I did like that combo a lot, primarily because down PB is a 4.5% flat, and then it has the bonus on top if the target's downed. Which I like a ton. What is your preferred combination?
So bring down PB is that's one of the big things. So when I was talking about Solus earlier, and I made the comment of, hey, you know, this is before the new EX augments are added. When I was mentioning, hey, you have like 4 or 5 light downs and 5 breaks to take advantage of, that is without EX bring down PB boost, which just, and 12 too. So 2 things that trigger specifically on a down that will make those like down moments so much more effective. Like we just didn't have at that time that we have now. So EX bring down PB boost is great for force. There's no anti-synergies. It's like one that you're happy to see all the time. But actually, one of my favorite combinations now is gradual pressing with bring down PB boost. And then this third slot, you could go by preference with either lively HP Starling just for the extra damage or Tri-Shield for the like utility. I prefer Tri-Shield.
Interesting.
Tri-Shield is a great way. It's well, because remember, when you guard something as a force, you get bullets. So Tri-Shield actually stocks your bullets as you go.
Ain't no way that actually works. That's so stupid. What?
Yep. It worked that way before, but like the thing that kind of held it back was that like you only had 1 bullet that you could ever stock, so you had to like send it immediately. But now that you have 2, it's like less likely to waste. You can use it offensively or defensively. If you want to use it defensively, you just kind of keep your distance. It stops you from catching strays. And if you catch a stray, oh, whoops, you have a little burst. That's cool. Or you can use it offensively to get a running start. I actually did this in the Engoku Arcs record, which I actually got the world's fastest time for that Engoku in both global and Japan using this combo, the Tri-Shield, gradual pressing, bring down PB boost. It's better than you might give it credit for, despite none of them. Well, I guess bring down boost does, but like 2 of them don't give you like raw, tangible extra potency in their like secondary effect.
He's saying that specifically because he knows of my hate of gradual, but continue, go on.
Gradual is great for force now. So, you know, because now we have the native 20% down factor buff to all of our techs, which is great. But so, you know, you add gradual pressing when it's fully stacked, and suddenly you're at 38% total. Or no, I don't think I got that right. Oh no, sorry. I'm looking at the guide. That's bouncer sub with gradual pressing. So hang on, 1.2 times 1.2. Okay, sorry about that. 44%. So you're at 44% extra down factor for just like right out of the gate, which is huge. So some of the most powerful things we have now in light of this are the tech arts that offer 100% like elemental down factor buff, like Grants 3.
Mm-hmm.
So you compound that with this, and suddenly you have something around like 300% elemental down factor, if not more, if you add in bouncer sub. So we add in bouncer sub 1.15. That turns into 65%, a little round up to 66% extra down factor. And then you just multiply that by 2. Yep. So 3 1/3 the elemental down factor if you stack everything together. So yeah, 3 grants acts like 10 in that fight if you
No.
add all things together. And suddenly you add something like 12, which gives you, the 2 potency, 5 crit rate on a down. You
Mm-hmm.
add bring down PB boost, which gives you the 2 potency and the gauge fill by 6% on the down. You add those, and all of a sudden these like down windows are like crazy for you. And so the more you can access them, the stronger you are. So I'm actually a big fan of gradual pressing and bring down boost as like a duo to have like as a force. And then you could just, the third is choose your own adventure. It could be whatever feels best for you. I am just a very big fan of either Tri-Shield or Lively. I tried Lively for a bit. I found it kind of annoying that I had to heal every time I took a stray, otherwise I lost the potency. And
Mm-hmm.
when I went with Tri-Shield, I was like, oh, this is so much better.
Yeah,
This is so much
the
better.
free bullets is kind of wild. And when you mentioned, I didn't even think about that honestly, because
Oh
again,
yeah.
when I do remember people mentioning that, and I was like, that's not really that important. And at the time, like you would run Lively plus Tri-Shield in a lot of situations, just because like that third slot, or I mean, we didn't have anything like bring down at the time, right? Like you didn't have access to that extra like massive amount of potency. But like just thinking about it, yeah, like I didn't really count it as a core before, but yeah, bring down plus gradual, depending upon the class, or if you just have a freaking TWAV, is pretty crazy when you think about
Yeah.
it.
Oh yeah. So I've been running my 12 with Tri-Shield, gradual press, bring down boost before the Sark's record, and I have been loving every minute of it. It feels really strong. I'm downing the crap out of everything. I'm giving everyone the buff. And during those downs, I am just like the fist of God. I'm just doing so much damage between the tech dom, the bring down boost, the extra 12, like potential potency effect, the extra crit. It's like it all comes together and it's like woof. It's like crazy
That is
how much you can
absolutely
hit.
insane. So yeah, I mean, in summary, forces enable themselves to deal insane amounts of damage given they have the. I'm trying to think of a piece of content where you wouldn't be able to utilize all of these tools. Like I don't know where.
I
I
got one
mean,
for you.
I'm
I
trying to
got
think. Like,
one.
go ahead. What would you say?
Dalian. Regrettably Dalian.
Dalian, yeah, because you don't
None of the puppets like physical or elemental downs count as
count as a
real
down.
downs.
Yeah, those are
So
fucked.
nobody gets their Slayer or their Slayer add-on like down crit rate. Fighters don't get their like extra potency for fighting a downed enemy. Forces don't get their tech dom. 12s don't activate their potential. EXPB bring down boost doesn't activate. It stinks.
BB or
So
bouncer doesn't get their PP regen. It's actually pretty stupid.
yeah,
That.
it
Yeah, I just
sucks. Yes,
that is one that's bad for everyone, I guess. So that's fair. But you do
but
get
otherwise
elemental downs
you'd
there
be
still, right?
correct. You for Dalian?
Yeah, for Dalian, there's still elemental downs that happen. Yeah.
No,
Is there none? No.
no. It's basically the damage based physical down at the very very end in phase 3,
In phase one,
like
I'm
right when
pretty
he's
sure you can
about
get
to
an
die.
elemental down. I'm almost positive we've gotten them before. In phase one in Dalian,
The puppets can
the two
be quote
puppets.
unquote elemental downed. The game doesn't treat it as a down though.
That's so stupid. Okay. I was like, I'm pretty sure
So
I've
you
seen
can
them get
stun
elemental
them.
downed.
Yeah, no, you can stun them with light and stop them from doing anything, but the game will not treat that as a down. So you're not getting extra potency, you're not getting extra crit rate, nothing's
Yeah,
happening.
I don't know why
But
downs don't just all count as downs. I don't
there is
understand what is.
a fun little interaction with that though, is because the game isn't treating it like a down, it also doesn't stop you from racking up down factor to the next down while it is down as it normally would.
Hmm.
So for fun, I went gradual press, bouncer sub, grants 3, the whole suite that I took to Solus.
Mm-hmm.
And I just wanted to see it, like how quickly can I down this puppet? And I downed it in 3 grants, and then I kept it down for the entire first minute of the fight before it actually had a chance to do something, because I just kept chaining the downs because I had so much down factor. It was really, really funny. And I was like, oh my God, if I had if I was getting any of my like bonuses for attacking a downed enemy here, Force would roll down, and this wouldn't even be close. This would be a slaughter.
Oh
It'd be
my,
disgusting.
that is
Because
ridiculous.
I would down the puppet like 5 times before it died. And during that time, I'm just thinking like, if this counted, that would be 30% of my PB for free, plus all the extra damage. Basically passive 2% damage, 5% crit rate because of 12.
Yeah.
Like just because I'm just reprocking the downs often enough that it never goes on cooldown or off cooldown completely.
That's so
I'm just
freaking
like, oh my
crazy.
god, we would roll and smoke Dalian if any of that counted. And you know what? I think in the big picture, they probably anticipated that, which is exactly why it doesn't happen.
I don't know why I feel like downs are over engineered. I feel like they have them to a point where they're not really, they don't need to have so many different types of them. It just feels like this is an elemental down, this is a physical down. I feel like those should be the only two things. And it's just like one's elemental, one's physical. Things that affect both. Things that affect one affects one versus the other. Anything outside of that, I feel like is just a little ridiculous. But that's one of those personal things as far as like looking at them.
Yeah.
Yeah, you say that and you're like, oh, dude, we do so much damage. My brain just thinks like, oh man, I'm losing so much damage for not countering those things swinging at all. Holy crap. Like my entire thought process is like, I'm just losing massive amounts of damage right now.
Exactly.
Please.
So what I just said, don't actually ever do that like in your group run, because it's like kind of troll, because like, you know, you will stun the puppets and you will stop your teams from doing, like, nobody is benefiting from them being down and nobody is farming counters. So it does actually hurt the run a little bit for you doing that. So don't actually like go into a Dalian run and like grants 3, gradual pressing, bouncer sub. Here we go. I'm gonna sunlock these things. Like it'll be funny and it'll be fun, but like in practice, like it will hurt your run.
Maybe do that if you're trying to carry some friends who aren't super great at countering things. Maybe, I don't know. But
it's there.
Yeah, it's an option. But yeah, like just thinking about where Force is at these days, it's awesome to hear that it's doing so much better and everything that's changed. It's, I mean, again, I've seen it. I've played with them, and I was thinking, I was like, dude, am I just ass? Like, am I just this bad at the game now that I can't keep up? And I'm like, when you kind of compound everything together, you really think about it, it's like, oh, I never stood a chance in the first place. It's like in a normal situation, yeah, we're about on par, but I don't think there's anything that Force right now in the game outside of Dalian. Like, actually, now that you mentioned it, the way that Force would not be great at those pieces of content would affect everyone for the most part. Because, like, I'm also capitalizing off of downs. Granted, I would much rather have a target swinging at me consistently, but, like, 15% crit rate while a target's down is nothing to sneeze at. Like, it's a pretty good chunk. And it's very helpful for those pinion crits, since that, I mean, if you don't crit pinion, you don't do any damage, is what we like to say. But outside of all of that, it's pretty crazy to see that Force is really just crushing things. It's glad that finally we have our black mage. Like, we have our single target.
The more downs in a fight that there are, or the more down opportunities there are, it's just like the exponentially stronger we are.
Oh,
it's so great.
That is awesome to hear. I think I might be in camp, like, actually use gradual. And to be fair, for those of you guys, before you get your pitchforks out about me not liking gradual pressing, this is always a conversation of, if you are not getting any more downs in an actual fight that's actually making any physical change, then is gradual pressing actually doing anything for you? Whether it's giving you a down faster or giving you down in a better spot is more likely what was happening in a lot of situations. As you know, when you build up a down, it's more difficult for the follow-up one, so on and so forth. Everyone likes to mention, like, oh, well, you get more of this and that actually works out. I'm like, yeah, well, it depends on the run. It also depends on the situation. However, in Force's specific situation, you have so much synergy that it is a no-brainer. And on top of that, the PB down EX is pretty nasty, which is actually, when activated, the strongest EX augment we currently have available in the game. So just keep that in mind. So that's pretty cool.
The tech arts that gave like 100% down factor before any of this was added were already like, it was hard to find a use for them, but when you could use them, they were so impactful because of like the 100% down factor they offered. Like when I was using them at the time, I was like, see, I wish like all of my techs could just feel like this in terms of like their ability to cause downs. This would be so much more fun if we could do that. So that gradual pressing with like the rod skill
Mhm.
to get like a total of like 44% down. That's like almost like half of what one of those tech arts are doing,
Mhm.
but like for everything. And it's like it kind of feels like that. I mean, sub bouncer and you're practically almost there. You're like more than 2/3 of the way there. Like it's way more than you think it is when it's stacked and you account for like the rod skill.
Mhm.
So I mean, gradual pressing was like it was all right before. I mean, you would mostly use it for down tuning, like you were saying. But now that we just have the free 20% without like needing to recruit a bouncer sub, it's exploded in value for Force in a way that I don't think most people are aware.
That sounds absolutely insane. I mean, like, if I had a fourth augment slot, it probably would go to gradual pressing at this point.
Oh yeah.
That's kind of the way I'd put that. I think I'm back in maintain shortage down PB land, thinking about the sort of synergy that I would have with my 12, just going for downs in the first place. I don't know. I've never been a fan of lively. Like the fact that you take a hit and you need to heal, because like I know people always like, oh well, you have a 8 HP heal. No, you're not using that to heal back up. You're using that to proc turnover, and that's it. If you're using that to heal back up, you are losing a lot more damage than you realize, because it's not healing you up as fast as you might think it is. Maintain balance and evade HP aren't as strong of a heal as most people really they want to elude you to believe. Maintain balance is really big on giving you those heals, but it's only like if you have really fast attacking hits. Where evade HP, it's you get a heal every time you counter. Keep in mind that heal is about as powerful as the heal that you got from maintain when you hit. So it's, unless you're countering a lot in a row, it's not really going to top you off very quickly.
No, not at all. Oh, but that reminds me. Remember when you were asking me about subclasses and you're like, well, why wouldn't you go Ranger? And I was like, well, I don't know if Ranger is enough to save you here
Yeah,
from
that's
getting aggro. Is it starting to make sense? Why not?
yeah.
It's like hard to articulate
It makes a
why,
lot
but
more
it's
sense
like,
with how much you actually have access to these days. Like we made it. It's funny enough. After we had that conversation, my editor Cry, he's the one who switched over to playing Force. He actually went through and made a weapon that actually has Dazzle on it on top of taking Ranger sub, and saw the damage increase. Like it was enough for him not to get threat, for me to hold everything for him, and then saw how much more damage he was dealing, and it was disgusting. Like he went up a solid, like I want to say 1 to 2K damage. I'm not sure if it was he didn't have to deal with threat, so he wasn't getting beat up the entire time on top of that as well.
Yeah, he was just there's also a component of just being free to siege that's helping there too.
He was able to
But
just
yeah,
dominate the entire time, and it was like like I was like, okay, cool. On like just for some people, just for numbers sake, like on the urgent quest, I was able to push out, I think at my peak, 20k DPS, and I was like, all right, cool. I feel pretty good about this because these guys have the shittiest weak spot of all time, and unfortunately, I'm not a Bandak. I'm Wix, so I'm gonna hit some non-weak spots. It's just gonna happen. It's kind of the way things tend to go. But when we're dealing with something like that, like yeah, I was able to push 20k. He was pushing like 23, 24.
That
like,
sounds about right.
And like I was like, Jesus fucking Christ, dude! Like how is this fair? It's like,
Yeah,
it makes sense.
and my thought when at that time was like, I know just Dazzle is definitely not enough, because I found that out before I was struggling with that before the Force update. Dazzle was never enough in my like
Yeah,
pre-mades.
it was never
Like not
really
just
that
like
strong.
pugs, but like pre-mades. Like pre-mades were like everyone is like better than me
Right.
and has like stronger gear, and I'm just like, oh my god, okay, why isn't this enough? Because it's definitely, there's more than damage that factors into aggro, and I don't think anyone knows what it is, but I think some combination of like range and down factor probably play a role into it.
I think so.
So
Yeah.
it's like, who knows, right? But whatever it is, that's why I was like, you could probably justify Ranger if you took Stealth Wall and Dazzle as EXs on your thing. Then it might be enough to like consistently get long range advantage and benefit from it. But
Yeah.
I'm glad to hear that it sounded to be that ended up being the case, because if that wasn't enough, why do we have long range advantage?
Yeah,
why do we have that?
Yeah, because when we talked about it, because we were talking about it on stream, I was like, I don't see, like, because I was talking in my chat, and I was like, long range advantage is definitely something you should use. Like, I can't foresee anything beating out a flat 15%. Like, there's, like, you guys can argue anything you want. I was like, that's a lot of damage, and it's applying to your whole kit. Everything you guys have mentioned only applies to specific points. I was like, when you're factoring damage as a whole, I can't foresee this being the case. And it wasn't until you mentioned, it's like, yeah, well, Ranger just isn't enough. I was like, That's the reason why. It's like, it's not
So
that it's even there. Granted, there are a lot of other options depending upon the specific situations in your fights, given certain circumstances. Like, but we're looking at just from the we were looking at it from very basic, like just very rudimentary. I cast hit damage on boss. Like we're like, okay, like what are these other things providing? And of course, we had the conversation of including Tector and the benefits those provide as well. And it was like, and the big selling point was just like also like Ranger's not enough. And I'm like, oh, that's interesting.
yeah.
Like that's very interesting.
By the way, for long range advantage, I do want to clarify that it actually does not affect everything. It is only specifically photon arts and techniques. So
Right, my
all
mistake.
charged and uncharged techniques, the Talus stuff, the stuff that's caused from your elemental skills like Feuerbrand, Bardablot, Zonde Clad, things like that, those do benefit from long range advantage, but like compound techniques, photon blasts, normal attacks, rod impact, bullets, weapon actions, anything like that, it does not benefit from long range advantage. Thankfully, if it did, I don't know what I would do
That
because it's
would
just so much damage.
that would be pretty wild. But yeah, no, it was pretty eye opening when you got that last message. I don't think it's enough outside. I was like, oh well, yeah,
Just what do you mean it's
that's
not enough?
that's a problem. Like I never, people are like, oh, you could just use Dazzle. I'm like, I don't think Dazzle's that strong. Like Dazzle is probably like enough to
No,
like
it's not.
it's a little bit, but it's not strong enough.
It
But
feels like half of what Ranger Stealth Strike is in like efficacy. I don't actually know, but just like the general feel I get from it,
mhm.
having used both independently and not together, is like I feel like it's definitely a like nerfed version of the Ranger skill for sure. It definitely does not pull the same weight in any capacity.
Which for the
It
record,
helps, but it's not enough.
which for the record, it should be. That's how it should be balanced. The
I
actual
agree.
skill itself on the class should be stronger than the EX option.
100% agree.
So, but yeah, no, the two of them needing to be together would be enough in a lot of situations. But keep in mind, guys, this is we're talking about situations where we're doing pre-mades, right? Like if you're going in to pugs, in most situations, if you're watching this interview, I'd like to believe it's probably going to be a situation where those two things aren't going to be enough, depending upon what you're dealing with. So just keep that in mind, something to keep in mind as well. I'm sure something somewhere mentions it in the Force guide. So just have it open, read about it. I'm sure there are other options that are that, and I've been told that Tector sub is just absolutely insane for Force.
Oh yeah, because
So
of all the compound buffs, Tector
mhm,
sub like exploded in value for us. Like it was already good. It's just ridiculous now. Like
mhm,
every arcs, like before, like arcs records, like you would see like Force Slayer, Force Bouncer, even Force Fighter here and there. Like people were like creative with their approaches.
mhm,
Now it's like having compound uptime be as high as humanly possible because it actually does the damage that you would hope it would do now. It's
mhm.
not this like wet napkin, like, ooh, like 450, woohoo, 510. Now it's like, 700. It's like much better now. So
Right.
it's like you want to spam them like off cooldown. So now pretty much all of like the major records being set by Force for majority of like at least Arcs record content are all for Tech or Sub. All of them, like without exception.
So yeah, just keep that in mind as far as your content goes. You're probably going to want to run Tector sub most of the time.
Oh yeah.
In most situations. But yeah, it's pretty cool. It's again super excited to hear Force is in the place that it is, and also great to get that relieving feeling that I'm not just ass at the video game. That Force is actually just ass blasting that hard. It's always
It's going crazy.
it's always a relieving feeling in those situations. But yeah, I mean, here's the fun part. Do you? I don't know if that's a fair question to ask because it's kind of a bias, and I kind of believe that's where it should be. Do you feel like Force is now in a place it should be in? Like, should Force
Yes.
kind of pull away in those circumstances, and should it be able to keep up with everyone else in the way that it does?
Yes, because it has its clear strengths and weaknesses. I think in terms of its baseline performance, given like what I have seen like top Force players do, both in global and Japan, from
Hmm.
my own personal experiences, and kind of just looking at the verification data storage,
Hmm.
I think in terms of like a baseline performance, assuming the fight is neither advantageous or disadvantageous to us, we throw down with the best of them. We're not like clearly blatantly more powerful than another class in any particular scenario.
Uneven playing field,
And we
basically.
get exponentially weaker. We like, I can't stress this enough. We get exponentially weaker the less downs there are in a given fight. like Dalian, like in a group setting, like with Weak Bullet, with Tector, Shifta, like all the goodies you can imagine, and I'm attacking the Weak Bullet and playing perfectly. Like I'm pushing like 18, 19K. I think that was with Trio Celio a while ago, back when the update first launched. Could probably do a little bit better now. Like that's still good, but it's like I have every like
Every
support
advantage
class,
possible.
but yeah, every advantage possible. Yeah, to like make up for the fact that I'm not getting tech dom. And then you look over and I'm in Dark Files Solus solo with a Trio Celio pulling 22K by myself with no support mechanics. Like that is the raw difference between like a fight that has zero, absolutely zero. Okay, well, not absolutely zero, but like 98% of the fight is without any sort of like down mechanic versus a fight where it's like it's unbelievable how many downs that you could whip out in the right build and totally abuse it. It's wild. It is totally wild, like what Force can do when you have more opportunities to down. So I think we have our very clear strengths and weaknesses. There's content that we're strong in, there's content that we're weak in. Across the board, we're just stronger in general, which is absolutely what we needed. But, you know, you put me in a bouncer and Dark Falls Dalian, I'm not going to keep up with the bouncer. There's no
For context,
way.
with that same situation, me attacking the opposite hand of the Weak Bullet and without the actual Sifta buff, I peak at 20K. And that's like just taking, that's just me using Ranger sub attacking a non-Weak Bullet spot. If I'm attacking the Weak Bullet and have buff, it's a done deal. Usually I'm the one on the opposite side. So that's just like a comparison for the two. And I'm okay, I'm good, but like, which is great. So you have to really consider like the comparison difference between, you know, overall skill level and then class level. So that's pretty massive. I'd imagine a bouncer in my situation that plays at the level that you do would probably push 20, 21, maybe 22K even without some of the advantages. And then with the advantages, hilarious. But
oh yeah,
that aside.
And I know one who is cooking Dark Falls Dalian solo, and I think they pull somewhere between 20 and 21K in the first, like the very first part. And for comparison, mine is like if I high roll, don't get hit, make and zero mistakes, and I use my current EX-AUG setup, the like maintain shortage, starling, turnover, that thing. If I use that as well, it's like 16K generously. So it's like there's like it's a massive gap between the performances. But then, like I said, you go over to Solus. I haven't tried it yet with my 12, and I'm actually I intend to once I get a pair of boots. I need a pair of boots first to multi-weapon on the rod. Haven't seen a good one on the market yet, but once I do, I'm going to go back into Solus to see how different things really are. But even then, with Trio Celio, you know, 22K for solo. Like if you told me Force was going to be capable of that post update, I would have laughed at you at the time. I would have been like, no way. There's absolutely no shot it does that much. It does like out damages like Ranger with Weak Bullet. Like there's no how in what universe is that possible? It's just I have no words for it. It's so crazy.
Well, maybe we'll scrape together and pull the unthinkable and just force Schmeetch into buying the 1500 SG multi-weapon item itself. maybe we'll pull together and force that to happen so we can get that run much sooner. But we'll see how that goes.
I just gotta wait for more boots to drop. I just gotta be patient.
Maybe the audience isn't patient. Maybe we'll just force that on them one of these days. We'll see. Make them do the unthinkable of converting AC into SG. Which, funny enough, is actually not a bad value for those who. I know I used to talk shit about it, but the value is actually pretty solid since they reduced the cost of pulling an NGS. But that's neither here nor there. But yeah, no, it's pretty funny. And for those of you guys who may be like thinking to yourselves like, oh, dude, it's like, yeah, those fights where Forces seem to be good at, and the Forces. I'll be honest with you, in the current state of the game, there are more fights that Forces are good at than they're bad at. So you're going to find Forces kind of dumpstering most content at the moment, at least if you're playing at a pretty average level. There's nothing really at an average level that Force isn't great at right now, so you're going to find them probably crushing most content. And that's totally fine. Totally reasonable. I'm not upset. I'm not going to curse at Mitch again. It's going to happen. But that's besides the point itself. Well, we've kind of gone over quite a few things. Had a lot of really fun stuff to talk about. Was there anything else that you wanted to push in here as far as like anything else to add? Keep in mind, guys, I don't want to give this, or I don't want this interview to be a reason not to read the guide, and that's why we haven't really gone over a lot of specifics, because the guide's there. Read the guide. But also, we're gonna get Mitch to make a video. It's fine. Read the guide.
Yeah,
it's there. Use the content that's available to you. Outside of that, was there anything else that was like that you wanted to, whether it be imparting some words of wisdom or including something else that might have been interesting that has happened since the Force update?
Trying to think if there's anything interesting that's happened since the Force update. Oh, yeah, I guess the last thing that I didn't really touch on, that I kind of maybe alluded to like way earlier on, is using like boots, for example, as a multi-weapon with Rod. Like before, like you could do it, but it was really annoying. Like you could throw in like pre-fire, like a fierce wave. I forget which tech arts does it, but the one that makes it last like a really long time, and it does like a gajillion damage for like the amount of time it takes to cast it.
I have it, so I'm going to pull it up on screen while you're talking about it. Keep going.
Yeah, so I forget which one that is, but that one, like you could do that, and like there were like creative ways to do that and Jet Sweep Jolt in like your Force gameplay loop, and you were very rewarded for doing so just because of how much stronger bouncer tools were than like rod tools at the time. But the major problem was that like you couldn't like reliably go back to rod very easily after having done that. Like basically you would have to have impact ready, not be under attack, and then use impact to swap back to rod quickly, which, you know, it was doable, but it didn't feel good. It wasn't clean. It was like kind of hard to pull off. And rather than playing around the enemy, you kind of had to like force yourself to play around that before you could go back to playing around the enemy. And it was really clunky. I don't know. I wasn't a fan. A few people managed to pull it off, but I always thought it felt pretty ugly. Now that Rod guards and throws out the bullets and everything, it's actually insanely good feeling to sub boots. There's a clip I have that could probably be thrown up on screen where I'm like seamlessly weaving between like boots weapon action and rod impact guarding, and it's like it's crazy how good it feels. It really is, because now you are able to like basically you swap to boots to quickly do the thing, and rather than needing to find a window where you're not under duress to swap back to the rod, you could take advantage of the fact that rod impact itself is a guard that you want to utilize, and use that to swap back to rod offensively from using your boots. It's awesome. It feels really, really good. So that's like another like little interesting thing that has changed with Rod. And I'm sure you could explore that interaction with not just boots, but maybe other multi-weapons as well. But now, because Rod impact like guards, it actually opens up a lot of like sub-weapon interplay if should you choose to explore it, because now you can swap back to Rod offensively without disrupting your gameplay loop. So it makes it much easier to weave in anything that you want from a different multi-weapon. Like I know Ink was a big fan of Force Gunblade. That probably feels a lot better now. He's not playing right now, but I'm sure, you know, that feels way more intuitive than it did before to swap between Gunblade stuff and Rod stuff, just because you're able to do so offensively. It's something I haven't put out any content officially yet, but I was actually cooking a solo that uses rod boots that was insanely fast and twitchy feeling. It felt as cool as it looked, if I may be honest. If I could toot my own horn, I'm really excited to get boots and try it again with 12. But I do intend to like do more rods boots content with that in mind, because now that I know it's there and I can feel how good it feels, I do actually want to explore like what can I add to like rod gameplay where I can use other weapon things to help. Because okay, so it's weird. So you can't just like spam Gifoy over and over again and be invulnerable forever, much like you can't just spam rod impact over and over, like just hold it down and then like you're invulnerable in like an extended hitbox where you just be taking damage constantly for like however many seconds. So the main thing that makes boots interesting now like for the weapon action, for example, is Boot's weapon action operates on invulnerability frames instead of guard frames. So it's like, there's like a cooldown almost with Rod Impact where you guard, and then there's some amount of time before you can actually meaningfully use your guard frames again, even if you have a guard available. But what Boots lets you do is you could quickly use a Boots weapon action to use iframes. It takes you out of the guard frames, and you could go Rod Impact back in, and you're able to use your guard frames again. Like there's interesting interactions in that way that I've found that I've been able to take advantage of in like a Solus fight. Which again, I'll send you the clip and you could put it on screen so it's like they could see what I'm talking about.
Right.
And it's just that kind of stuff. I want to explore that because there are some things where like you might be able to get away with those weapon, like sub-weapon types, where they might offer you like a damaging tool that is more damage than possibly a technique in that situation, or even like they allow you to fit something in between two techniques that otherwise might not have fit there before. In the case of the extended hitbox, like say this Darkfall Solus laser, like that comes in, you open with a Rod Impact guard, and you can wait a little bit before the guard frames to run out. And then if you time it right, you could just use Rod Impact again and do a second guard, and then you're fine. But there's still that dead air in between those two guards where if you try to squeeze a technique in there, it'll take too long. And you won't be able to throw up your second guard in time, and you'll take the hit. But I can, in that same scenario, throw up the first Rod Impact, and this is going to be the clip that'll probably be on screen, use two Boots weapon actions, and then go back to Rod Impact in time to actually like get that guard back before the lingering hitbox ends. And then suddenly I'm fitting two like 500 potency actions that I otherwise was just dead air before then in that same hitbox. So it's like, it's unique opportunities like that have really opened up with this change to Rod Impact. And I'm only just starting, like scratching the surface of like what those are, where to find them, and like, what really is like some of the best like interactions available to Force. And that's only going to expand over time. So that's like the last thing I don't think we've really got a chance to go really in depth on that really like excited me, that hasn't seen a lot of like mainstream like Phantasy Star video content yet, but just give me some time, and at the very least I'll definitely put it out there. It's really cool what can be done.
Yeah, the whole concept with Rod Impact, just the ability to use it in more of an it's funny to say it this way, but like the ability to use it more offensively with swapping. For those who don't really play a lot of multi-weapon content, the biggest boon here in this situation is anytime you're using an ability that could be used on a different weapon, for example, specifically with Force, you can cast from Jet Boots. So the ability to swap back to Rod properly was not the easiest thing in the world to do. You kind of had to buffer or look for an opening or be able to like Rod Impact really was the right way of doing things in most situations.
It's the only way.
Yeah, realistically, it's the only way you would do it outside of just buffering a normal attack or something, which would be awful.
Pretty much.
And you couldn't like if you're like me and have a dedicated weapon action button, like that wouldn't work. It depends on like how you're playing. But now with the ability to just use impact offensively into the attack that's coming, to also have guard frames, you're able to do a lot more. And that does mirror, I mean, that's kind of something that's unique to Force really in that situation, because there's not a lot of other classes that's easy to do with. Like that's something that I would imagine a good fighter is able to do with backhand smash or whatever the heck it's called these days, I forget, with going into knuckles, if that's something that you wanted to use, or like going back and forth between specific weapons. Like those are options that you have available to you that isn't always available to everyone. So it's pretty cool, and it's interesting to see, and I'm looking forward to seeing more content for that. That's going to be really cool to see. Like we've looked at a clip, like that clip that you showed from Solus. We looked at that clip on stream, and that was pretty dope. With the multiple, we actually, it was funny because I was like, I was like, that's two. I was like, holy shit, that's 4 counters. I was like, that is absolutely insane.
Yeah,
I was like,
that's the impact. That's the one I was talking about. Yeah,
I was like that was like, that's 2 weapon actions. Like, hold on, let me slow that down. That's 2 actions. That's like, that's 4 counters and 1 ability. What the yo, that's crazy. So yeah, it's gonna be cool to see stuff like that more often. So yeah, I'm excited. I am actually fairly excited for the new class rework, the class expansions that are coming. I know people like rework this row. I was like, I'm gonna be very solid and say expansion, because they are building on what's already there instead of completely retuning things. So I don't want to get anyone's hopes up too high. I know some people that don't like Hunter gameplay currently. You're probably not gonna like Hunter gameplay later if you really hate the base version of Hunter. So just keep that in mind for different classes that are on the way in the horizon, and tailor your expectations. All right, so this is going to be probably post edit. We totally missed Talus, and it's not
Oops.
because we hate Talus or anything like that. It was just a little forgettable, and we might have been lost a little bit in the rod sauce. That's horrible out of context. Don't clip that out of, you already have. Anyway, so we're going to interject this in the middle. This is actually recorded post interview, but we didn't want to leave Talus out. So we're going to go ahead and interject this portion into the edit itself. So it might seem a little bit out of place, but we didn't want to include it in the overall conversation. So now, because I forgot to ask the question, honestly, it's on me as the interviewer. What has happened to Talus since the changes with Force? What are we looking at? Do we see any positives? I mean, I hear mostly it's still kind of meh, but like, is it a better meh? Is it a worse meh? Where are we at right now?
Regrettably, meh still.
Okay.
So like in terms of like AoE, like pretty much nothing changed. I mean, it just basically like spread shot, and then you like clear out all the mobs with like your chosen element. Like,
Mm-hmm.
there's nothing much that changed there. Most of the tweaks that they did were to the weapon action and single target.
Mm-hmm.
So I will say there was some small quality of life improvements that they did to Talus. In my opinion, it wasn't enough to really put it on the map, but I did notice the
Okay, fair
changes,
enough. It
and they
was
are
noticed.
welcome.
It was noticed. That's
Yeah.
good. We're glad it wasn't totally ignored like we did. We totally didn't. But
So I'd say the first main thing is that the weapon action came like upgraded from shooting like 18 Ps over the duration to 24 peanuts. Do with that analogy what you will.
24 peanuts would hurt me more than 18 peas. Are we talking cooked peas? Are we talking frozen? No, I'm just kidding. Anyway.
So I mean, it's the weapon action is still wholly unremarkable on its own.
Mm-hmm.
But it does fire like I said, it used to fire 18 shots of like ultra negligible damage. I mean, I'm talking like double digit, like off, like when the Talus is like not out,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe triple digit, like if it was out, like per tick. It was nothing impressive at all.
Right.
Now it's like more comfortably like triple digits when you have the Talus out, and it shoots like 24 times instead of 18. So it's like it's something, right?
Right.
Like it's
Right.
definitely noticeable, but in the like big picture of things, it's still, like I said, you're just throwing peanuts at it. The main thing that this change like enables
Mm-hmm.
is that you no longer have to spam normal attacks
Mm-hmm.
and like other like Talus actions to get the mark up and running.
Oh
The
yeah, I heard
weapon
about that.
action is like sufficient in and of itself to apply the mark. Granted,
And
you probably want to accelerate the mark like first appearing by
mm-hmm.
like weaving some stuff in, but like if you want to, you could totally ignore the like normal attacks, step counters, things like that, and just let the weapon action do its thing,
Mm-hmm.
and it will apply the mark on its own, which is actually quite nice. That's something I did want it to do before the update, and I was happy to see that. They also made the mark matter more. It used to be 5% extra damage from anything from a Talus. Now it's 10%.
Mm-hmm.
So,
I mean,
some
that's good.
gains.
A bit
Yeah.
above buff. Now, I'm gonna
Yeah.
interject here really fast.
Mhm.
I don't know why this is a thing, and this isn't just like a Force thing. Honestly, I feel like it's something that should be fixed across the board. And this happened back when there was an issue. I kind of I apologize for this for those of you guys who are dealing with it now. I fault Bouncer in a sense because of this, because of our weapon action. They changed
Mm.
coding specifically so that whenever the active weapon isn't the damage that's been like, so for example, like, with soaring blades, whenever we used to use weapon action from a soaring blade, but you were using a different weapon, it used to shoot the soaring blade weapon action still or whatever in between, like the frames in between, but it did less damage, or it do full damage. They changed it so now it does less damage, and they did that for like all weapons across the board. I don't know why they do that for weapons of the same class. Like, I understand that perspective. Like,
Yeah.
if it was like, okay, you're using a set of daggers, right? And then, because what it was is it was a bug. It wasn't more of a bug. It was like an exploit, basically, where you would take advantage of how fast you would attack on daggers, but also take advantage of how quickly a soaring blade's weapon action would come out in between the frames between dagger attacks during Blade Fanatic. So what you were able to do was you could spam the weapon action button for soaring blades while using a specific PA during Blade Fanatic, and you would get soaring blade blades to fly off in between the frames of the PA's downtime.
Oh
They
God, that is
It
disgusting.
was
In
absolutely
a good
gross.
way.
I have a video of it up actually, and I blame myself for even showing it off because it got fixed. I mean, it was gonna get fixed anyway. I was all over Twitter, but like I showed the video of it, so I sort of blame myself in that aspect. Overall, it technically buffed Soaring Blade's weapon action because they made it so like there was a cooldown in between use of it, but then they made it stronger overall. But at the
Yeah.
same time, like it kind of killed that playstyle. And at the same time, they also implemented a system where if the weapon wasn't the active weapon, it didn't do full damage of the weapon action, which I just think is stupid. Like just allow the weapon, like, cause it would give so much utility to all these other weapons, right? Like Talus, allowing Talus to have its full damage. Like granted, it's not like gonna be that much stronger, right? But like imagine if it was worth pressing the weapon action button occasionally in between like weaves and things of that sort that you could actually utilize. Make it worth using. Think about from the perspective of like a fighter. Whirlwind would be more worth keeping up at all times with other combos in between. It would make Double Saber insanely great utility if you weren't someone who liked to use Double Saber primarily as a weapon, right? Like, it just seems silly because it even happens with Double Saber. If you don't have the Double Saber out, the damage is peanuts. Like,
Yeah.
I don't get why that's a thing. Like, it shouldn't be a thing. It should definitely be something that works, and it gives a value to multi-weapons because it specifically only works with multi-weapons. I know that one for the fact when it comes to the Double Saber situation, because if you weapon swap, it doesn't leave it doesn't leave it out, and if you weapon swap with the Whirlwind, it stops doing damage. So like it gives a value. I wanted to interject that in there because you mentioned like specifically like while the Talus is out, it does like peanuts damage. Of course, it always does peanuts damage, but it does like way less. I just feel like that's stupid.
Yeah, it's like deshell the peanuts and that's what you're getting.
Yeah, like
when it's not out.
it just doesn't make any sense. And I feel like weapons like Talus would have a little bit like you would think about it more like as a Tector, as a force, like you might be incentivized in situations where like, oh, maybe I can't really use jet boots all that well in this situation. Maybe I throw on a Talus, add a little bit of extra damage there. Like I don't know, whatever. I'll let you continue forward. I just wanted to interject that. I was like, I feel like that's so stupid.
Yeah, and I mean, in theory, if that interaction was allowed to exist, it would also mean that I could apply a Talus mark outside of using Talus, which would give Force its own de facto like mini weak bullet. But like the way the Talus mark works is that like it doesn't matter where the mark is, if it's just on the enemy, just everywhere on the enemy is free real estate for that damage bonus, which is nice.
I feel like
But
it'd be great for Force and for Tector.
yeah. So I could see a situation like, which by the way, if you apply if you try to apply a Talus mark without the Talus being out, the weapon action actually doesn't apply any progression to like accumulating the Talus mark if the Talus is not out. So you couldn't abuse that anyway. I've tried. I've tried. It's the first thing I thought of when I saw that the mark got buffed, and it's an interaction I never really checked in the first place. So I was sad, but understanding that that didn't really exist. Anyways, so that improved for Talus, you know, the mark, your ability to apply it and keep it up. And they also just kind of made minor adjustments to your single target damage, mostly by way of convergence shot. Again, nothing crazy, but like, you know, it keeps up a little bit better now.
Mm-hmm.
Is it anything anywhere near what Rod can do?
I don't think it ever will
Single
be.
target, no. In single target, no. It's still very much a situation where, you know, for certain elements and in certain situations, spread shot when aligning with elemental weakness is your strongest option versus like many of the other like techs or even tech arts available like as an equivalent for that same situation.
Mm-hmm.
But not for every element. Some elements like Talus is just straight up like bullied out like in all like single target and multi-target if you like play it right, because they just unfortunately, or rather fortunately for most people, made Rod that good and Tex that good. But yeah, this was sort of like a disappointing thing to see for Talus, because as you know, I love Talus. Which is a bold thing to say after I wholly forgot to mention it for almost 2 hours other day.
I totally blame myself. I should have had the question there, and I completely overlooked it. And like trying to keep the interview down to a reasonable amount of time. Because last time we had a pretty long one, right? And I was like, okay, yeah, let's pull this back a little bit and make it a little more digestible. And I was like, when you mentioned, he's like, I totally forgot Talus. I was like, oh no. Because like I didn't even remember. You had to tell me. Oh no.
Like I didn't even remember until other people were like, oh, I can't wait to see what he says about Talus. And I'm like,
yeah. Well, now it's here. So now you have the inclusion of Talus itself. The one question I know is probably burning for some people, and I'm also curious about it. is it worth weaving Talus weapon actions in if you don't have another multi-weapon that would be beneficial for the weapon? Or is it actively a damage loss? I feel like it would be a damage loss.
So, kind of going off of what I was talking about with jet boots, where rod impact guarding leaves an offensive transition off of any multi-weapon action, which would make any like multi-weapon combination much more seamless in the hands of Rod as the driver.
Right.
And this is no exception. So in theory, if you were wanting just a little extra credit, you could actually throw out a Talus weapon action, offensively swap back to Rod using impact. That is available to you. That said, I don't think it's justifiable just because the Talus weapon action loses. I mean, it was already like damage, but it's like really like nothing when you swap off of Talus. Like even as like a damage over time things, like with other weapons you can have like a raw like counter that might be higher damage than anything in the like main toolkit of force, and that's cool, and then you offensively swap back. I would not consider Talus weapon action weaving to be one of those things. It's more of like a niche situation like Darkfall's Aegis, where like you can't really hit him and he's about to attack you and give you the opening, and you're just trying to throw up as many different flavors of like dots damage over time like attacks as you can, so you have like, so you're like squeezing as much damage as you can in on that limited window. And it's like that, you know, like maybe like Gigrants 3, Gizonde, the Talus weapon action, and right when he's about to like smack you, you swap back to Rod with Rod impact, and boom, you've got like 3 like decent dots like ticking at the thing before you're even attacking it. Maybe something like that, like super duper edge case stuff, but like really, I don't think it would be worth it. And
So
just to address the nature of Talus, like, is it viable as like a main weapon? I thought it was viable before. You know, if you love Talus and Talus is your thing and you have fun with Talus, you know, nothing about that changed. It's still a viable main weapon. But if your expectations were that it was like going to hit like maybe not as hard as Rod, but maybe like within like a standard deviation of Rod, like at least in single target, like this probably was very disappointing to you.
I see.
Because I mean, they seem to like address some of the quality of life stuff that I mentioned earlier, but fundamentally, the main thing that holds Talus back in single target, which is what held it back in the first place, and this is what they didn't address that I wish they did, was that in single target, like, yeah, your like convergent shot damage increased, yeah, the Talus mark potency increased, you know, you still have these tech arts that allow for lots of downs to access technique domination. You still got all of these angles, you know, the compound buffs and everything. So like there's a lot of like just general force stuff that also benefits Talus. It's not exclusive to Rod. But the main thing that held it back then, and it holds it back now, is your only defensive like counterattack is a step counter. And it fucking blows.
That sucks.
It's unremarkable damage. It doesn't really like do anything like utility wise for you, except for like, you know, kind of upkeeping the mark. It's really kind of just disruptive to the flow of like what you're trying to do for Talus, like very much so. Something I wish they did that they didn't was either change step counter to like, you kind of like a Rod impact situation where it follows the last element used. So that way it's like you're at least doing like more elemental down factor. There's a little bit of extra damage reward for like being on the right element. Yeah, I feel like there's a couple things they could have done there to really like bring Talus home, because fundamentally I think that is like the main thing that makes Talus feel as bad as it does, is its reliance on step counter, not in a damage sense, but in a like there's nothing else you can do with an enemy attack other than step counter, and the step counter is not intuitive to the flow of Talus.
Gotcha.
So that's something I wish they addressed and that they didn't.
So more or less to sum it up, where it comes down to it, it's precast, yes, but not worth the opportunity cost for weaving, essentially, is what it sounds like. I feel like it would be probably a loss if you mess something up.
Yeah,
Okay, like
more or less.
a bit of a bummer. I mean, I don't really foresee a situation where Talus really gets. I mean, it would be nice if it got closer, like by far closer to what Rod was doing, but I don't ever really foresee a situation where Talus really pulls ahead. That's not to say Talus is not playable. That's not to say you can't do. I mean, every weapon in the game is playable. I am not joking. I know a lot of people like to make jokes about individual weapons that just aren't playable or whatever. Like everything is playable. Everything you can clear content with reasonably. Like it's not a situation where one weapon just can't perform at all. But when you are looking at the absolute upper echelons of things, if you were looking at comparatively keeping up with the Rod versus a Talus, picking up and using a Talus as the main weapon sounds like it's a choice, not really like an optimization, which
Yeah.
is not really a bad thing. You can make that choice. Everyone can make the individual choice to use the weapon that they want. But that's, I mean, I think that kind of pretty much covers all of it, yeah, as far as Talus is concerned.
Yeah, pretty much. And, if for some Sega, if you are listening, please just do something about the step counter. I know, like, if once a class gets their updates, my tinfoil hat thing, another one is that, that same class is probably not going to see an adjustment unless something is really, really like broken in a bad way that like ruins the game until every class has kind of gotten their update, their moment. That's at least that's what I think. So like I feel like the way Force is now is the way it's going to be until every class has gotten their update. And after that, that'll be the next time we might possibly be changed. That said, Sega, if you're listening, please like add something to fix step counter. I don't care how you do it. I don't care how you angle it. Just the fact that we have to step counter so much and step counter is not intuitive or rewarding to the gameplay flow that Talus wants to do in single target just completely ruins the experience of the weapon. And it could be simply fixed as easy as just making the step counter like don't even like not even needing potency adjustments, just making it follow the last element that you casted. So that way, it's applying elemental down factor continuously. It's a little bit of extra single target damage. And if you have to have the Talus out and cast technique with it to kind of get it to align in elements, so kind of like you have to do a jet boots, it's kind of like harder to abuse with multi-weapons because I could foresee a situation for that where like, you are like a class that does mostly physical downs, but you want a step counter that does elemental stuff to eventually get a free, like low-hanging fruit elemental down. I could see that abuse there. So I could imagine they probably won't do that, but just if you're listening, the step counter is a problem. The fact that we have to do it so much with Talus as a main weapon is a problem. It doesn't feel good. It's disruptive to the flow. It's not optimal for damage. It's literally, I would say, in my opinion, the only thing that kind of held back Talus from being like a success along with Rod in terms of the global changes that were done.
So if there was any question of whether or not he cared about Talus, that should answer it for you.
Okay, yes.
That
We were
should
just too
answer the
excited
question
about
for you.
Rod yesterday. We just got too excited about everything else that, oops, Talus.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, unfortunate. Yeah, it has its problems. Definitely would love to see changes. Depends on where they want it to be. Ultimately, like that's something that you do have to come to terms with. Everyone's going to really have to come to terms with is do they want the weapon to stand on its own? We haven't had that conversation since NGS has started. Do they expect weapons to stand on their own? Do they expect them to be used with something else? How they're expected to be used? Until they're honest about that, how those changes go, they're never really going to make 100% sense to us. So we'll have to see. They've had the conversation before. Hopefully they'll have it again. Outside of that, though, before we wrap things up, was there any specific shout outs you wanted to give out? Or, I mean, other than, of course, the usual, we're going to be linking the socials, check the guide, all that good stuff. Anything else you want to go ahead and throw out there?
Well, as always, shout out to Kat. She always helps like do Force stuff with me. And, a lot of the players have been like kind of really frustrated lately. And a lot of like the household Force names have kind of like taken a step back, which makes me sad. So like it really makes me happy to see all these new Force players coming up, but also it's just like Kat is like one of the few like kind of like heavy hitters in like the Force sphere for global that still will like come around to Force and do things. So shout out to her. It's always fun to see like her do Force stuff and like all the time attack things that she can do with that, especially for like in Goku. Like it was so fun like actually having like somebody to in global to race again. It like I wasn't used to it. Not because it's like, oh, I don't have any competition. It's like no one played Force
Yeah,
at like seriously prior to this update. So I was like, oh my God, I have people to play with.
Yeah, there were no force players.
But like,
That's not a
yeah.
that's not a crazy thing. Yeah, there were no force players. People were swapping off of force left and right. So
So as always, shout out to Kat and her community. They always do a lot of fun stuff with speed. As I am Schmeetch, you can always find me on YouTube and Twitter. That is the main place I post things. And also, I know that people aren't the biggest fan of reading, and I did have to get the actual like written component of the guide done first and overhaul everything with it. But there is a like video substitute of the guide, or at the very least, some of the more important parts of it in the works. It is in production. I don't have an ETA. So don't be like, oh, video's coming, I'm not going to read the guide. No, please, like,
just read the guide.
don't wait for me to make the video. I promise I went through everything. I simplified everything down. There's a lot less bloat. It's a lot more just straight shooting. Like it's an easier read than it was before, despite what you may think. So don't wait for me to make the video. Please check out the guide to like get all your questions answered. And a video is coming in the works that will be for certain sections, and kind of depending on demand, if more of the guide needs to be videoized, I will absolutely do that.
Absolutely, for sure. And yeah, absolutely, just read the guide. Reference the guide again. Control F is your friend. Have it available that you can look into and things of that sort. And of course, we will take a look at it when the video production does go live. Give it some time, of course, and then we'll go over it and everything like that. So if you not happen to see it, keep an eye on them. Of course, we're going to leave links in the video description to everything. That way you guys can go ahead and follow socials. That way you guys will be available and aware whenever that video guide does drop. But for someone who doesn't follow a ton of people, we will check it out as well. So just be ready for that. Outside of that, as always, Meech, I appreciate your time. Thanks for joining me today. It was a blast. It's good to know that Forest is just as strong as I thought it was. I just needed to make sure I was right.
Yes, sir.
I didn't want to be that salty guy that was just like, this seems so strong, like this is insane, I can't keep up or whatever. I'm like, it seems like it's pretty busted. I'm not going to say busted, that's not fair. It just seems like it's insanely powerful.
Yeah,
that seems to be the case. But I'm still bad as outros as always. Like if you enjoyed the video, sub you want to keep up with more. As always, thanks to channel members. You guys are fantastic. I appreciate every single one of you, and I will see all you wonderful individuals in the next video. Take care, my friends. Peace out.
see ya.